This sitting is resumed. We revert to the Standing Finance Committee.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee. And seeing that I don't get the opportunity to regularly, I want to pose a question to the Honourable Minister and his team. With respect to the welfare office in St. Lucie, which has been closed since 2019. We understand the fact that COVID would have come and hindered some progress or intervened, but I have noticed in a lot of the discussion so far, it seems that most things stop in my good neighboring parish, St. Peter. But we are all well aware that there's another constituency beyond that, another parish beyond that, the northernmost parish, which is St. Lucie. And persons have to now travel to Spicestown. Persons who wish to see the welfare officer has to travel to Spicestown in this regard. So I want to know what are the plans of the ministry with respect to the reopening of the office or welfare offices, some being either reopened or established elsewhere but in St. Lucie.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning to you and to the team, and again, a very special good morning to my team. I will turn over to the Chief Welfare Officer to address your question.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Minister. The office in St. Lucie is currently under repairs. And yes, I know it's been under repairs for a while, but we await completion of those repairs. The clients for St. Lucie are currently being serviced at the Speightstown office. And though this may not be ideal, we're looking at other offices through the amalgamation so that we can have greater representation in the communities. So your constituency could actually have more than one office for clients to choose from. So we look forward to the amalgamation and what that brings with it.
I'm extremely happy to hear that. Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Thank you. And interestingly enough, you should ask that as your first question, because I would have a similar question as it relates to St. Andrew. Because as you know, the building that once housed the welfare office in St. Andrew, that building housed the welfare office, but it also housed the post office. That building has been renovated. I'm very thankful to the Ministry of Home Affairs for that. But I've noticed that there are seems to be no plans for the return of the welfare office to St. Andrew. Of course, we too are serviced by the office in Speightstown, and as the crow flies, Speightstown is not very far from St. Andrew, but the realities of some of the conditions in St. Andrew makes it difficult for some of our elderly and indeed some of our vulnerable to get to Speightstown. So are there any plans similarly to what the chairs had asked for the return of a welfare office or some facility back into the Belle Plaine area in St. Andrew?
Thank you, Honourable Member. Unfortunately, I'll have to give you the same answer that I gave to your colleague. We know that the situation in St. Andrew remains critical for an office. And that too is being considered when we're looking at the other community offices that can service St. Andrew. So you're included as well.
Mm-hmm. And you would have spoken about the amalgamation of a number of social services under your ministry, and I'm asking if this will see improved services being offered to those rural spaces. We know, I think I heard mention of the fact that the return of the community nurses and all such things that are peculiar to rural spaces where we do not have ready access to some facilities as you may find in urban spaces. If we may see improved services with the amalgamation of the various social services to those rural spaces in Barbados, St. Joseph, St. Andrew, St. Peter, St. Thomas, St. Lucie.
I would like the PS respond, please.
Good morning. My name is Jehu Wiltshire, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of People, Empowerment and Elder Affairs. The amalgamation will certainly see an improvement in terms of the services that are provided. We have selected 35 locations covering all the parishes that were visited by a team comprising the ministry, the Environmental Protection Department, the Environmental Health Department, the Ministry of Housing and Lands, the Barbados Fire Service, as well as officials of the ministry, with a view to identifying specific locations for community-based offices. And the intention is, as part of the amalgamation, and as part of the amalgamation process, is to ensure that a person, I'm going to speak directly on the ground now, so that a person can actually go to this office and receive a number of services. Because what the amalgamation is essentially about is ensuring that there are more efficient and effective services in terms of bringing the National Disability Unit, the Child Care Board, the National Assistance Board, as well as the Welfare Department together. So as I would have indicated on Tuesday, it is going to be based on a technological foundation in terms of a new MIS system where instead of going to each department for a particular service, you'll actually be able to go to one department, log in your information, your application, and you'll be able to get services at that specific location. So you definitely will see an improvement in terms of the service that are provided to each and every parish in the island. Thank you.
Thank you. You would have made mention of on Wednesday, when we last sat, of the companionship program, that's the title. And I'm wondering, and let me just say at the outset that is perhaps, was a fantastic initiative. I've seen, even within my area, my constituency of St. Andrew, I've seen the benefits of it. And my question, therefore, is there any scope for the expansion of it? I know there are a number of persons who have been listed as vulnerable. They're the elderly, and I think I heard that persons who might have been disabled due to accident or something like that, or stroke, could also benefit from that program. What about persons who are mentally challenged? Those persons who have outgrown some of the institutions are now at home, they cannot work. In some cases, they are a burden to relatives and parents. If those persons are also captured under that program, or if there's any scope later to incorporate persons like that, whose parents may also need a break. I recall part of the rationale for this companionship program is to give those family members a chance, a break sometimes to go and do stuff, maybe work. In some cases, there are persons who can't work because they have to stay at home and care their mentally challenged children and wards. If that program, if it already incorporate persons like that, and if no, if there are plans to incorporate those persons like that in the future.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I will add a few words and then allow the Director and/or the Coordinator of the program to elucidate on the real substance of the matter. So thank you for the question again. Thanks for the endorsement of the program. It is a program of which I think all the members are proud. But the reality is for us that the situation facing elderly people, well, facing society, is that our society is aging, and that there are a significant number of people who are elderly now and reside in the community, many without support and some with support. I'm fascinated by the words that you chose to use, though, burden their family, because the truth is the first level of care in any society should be the family. That's the first. And it should only be in the circumstances where it becomes exceedingly overwhelming that the state is then called in. So the state should play a supporting role to the family. In fact, I'm sure when the Director speaks, she would tell you that our program is to age in place, which is to offer support so that the elderly can stay home and be cared for. And I say that because there is now a feeling that the government is going to be able to do all these things. I've made the point that in the next 20 years, we anticipate that a significant portion of our society will be over 60. Some records indicate that 50% of our society could be over 60 or near 60 in the next 20 years. That is 100 and something thousand people. It is going to be almost impossible to offer that level of intervention. So we need to rethink it, and I hope the Director goes through some of the strategies that we've discussed to be able to address it. But here's the thing, Honourable Member. Currently, there are people who, with training, maybe we could get them to take better care of their elderly persons. But then there's some people who seem to think that it's no longer their responsibility too. And so there is a balance. I think we have to offer training so people can offer care, but there's also the idea that at the end of the day, people have to be able to look after their own family with support. I'd asked the Director to inform me, and I could tell you that currently there are now 4 persons who are basically, elderly persons who are basically abandoned at Harrison's Point. There are 9 persons, elderly persons, who are basically abandoned at the QEH. And of course, they become the responsibility of the state, and the caring state will look after them. But we have to do better than that. And I know that when a family has to deal with dementia or any of these other old age diseases that come as a consequence of aging, that it becomes very difficult to deal with. And we have to find a way to help families deal with those things. In relation to your question directly, whether we're going to expand the program or not, if it were up to me, I'd have, thousands of community elder care workers. I'd have hundreds of National Assistance Board home health staff. But these things require resources, and the cost over time will become extremely unsustainable. That is why I think the real remedy here is aging in place, community-based care, home health support, those kind of things. But I would ask the Director of the National Assistance Board to speak, please.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question. And you would have first talked about the expansion of the program. Now, any expansion of the program has March this year. Will make 2 years that we'll be running the program since 2021. And any expansion or so on would depend on the review which we plan to undertake of the program. So 2 things are going to be happening. Currently, we are undertaking an independent review of all of our services. And then in the new financial year, we will be undertaking an independent review specifically of the elder care program. The findings of those reviews will inform where the gaps, the deficits, the strengths, and the weaknesses of the program are. And then that will further inform, because we'll also be going not only to the workers, but to the family members as well. It would not only inform the community elder care program, but also our other services where there are gaps in the services, where we probably need to put more workers. We understand, particularly in the rural parishes, which sometimes not as densely populated, and rural persons tend to look after their own compared to the other geographical areas in the urban corridor. So yes, we will undertake that review, and then based on that, we'll probably look at how to restructure, reconfigure, look at those. It may not be that we expand the number, but also we may look at what it is that the persons are doing. Are they meeting the expectations of the families? And if we need more, to look at the tasks and the job descriptions of these persons as opposed to numbers, and how, if there are areas of inefficiencies, and how we can address that. But it will all be informed by the review.
Thank you very much. And firstly, let me say to you, Honourable Minister, I'm glad that you chastised me for using the word burden. I really shouldn't have used that word, and for that I apologize. But it got me to thinking, even with new legislation, a lot has been said recently about the new legislation that will be coming from your ministry. And I wonder if in drafting this legislation, if close attention is paid to language. There are words that are rooted in a colonial past, rooted in a bygone century, that those words have no place in a modern 21st century Barbados. I recall some time ago the word bastard was removed from the legislation, and the indignity that came with that term over time disappeared from the landscape of Barbados. This word disappeared from the lexicon of Barbados. And if there are words that are, when you are going forward, if there are words that we now use maybe to refer to our elderly, to our disabled, if you pay close attention to that language, because we all may not necessarily understand the psychology of words, the psychology of language, but we know that certain words, they hurt. Certain words cause discomfort. If that's something that you're looking at as you draft your new legislation going forward.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I want to begin again by thanking the team who's done so much work on the elderly policy and the elderly legislation. I also actually would like to take this opportunity to commend, was it CBL? CBL. the law firm that, you've seen me in the paper having conversations with, because they're now part of our team as well, helping us draft, being part of the architecture of the final piece of legislation. I think when everybody works on it, it's going to be perfect. The current methodology for drafting legislation requires tremendous interaction with the CPC, the Chief Parliamentary Council. And a lot of the old language that you would have seen in a lot of the old pieces of legislation, since we've come into office, a lot of those words are no longer used. They're actually quite demeaning and in some cases insulting. I was trying to remember the word that the Honourable Member for St. Michael East finds particularly painful, and I can't remember it, but I know he doesn't like words like squatter and other words. But words have power, and that is why you have to be sensitive to how people choose to be called. That is why persons with disabilities prefer to be persons with disabilities than differently able, and so on and so forth. Or a person prefers to be called hard of hearing than hearing impaired, and those things. But over time we will get there. But beyond that, I would like the chief, perhaps the director again, or Ms. Wiltshire, she's here, to be able to speak to what we're doing in terms of the policy, the strategic action plan, both of which we did with the support of PAHO. So I want to thank PAHO for the support that they gave us. And the conversations that we're now having with the Law Reform Commission to help us draft the final legislation. And of course, the language that you speak of, sir, runs through the child protection legislation, it runs through the disabilities legislation, and it will go through the legislation for the elderly. So Ms. Wiltshire perhaps could probably best speak to where we are in terms of the legislation, and then Ms. Walcott, or reverse order.
Good morning again. My name is Jacqueline Wiltshire. As I say, I work with the Elder Affairs Program. And once this national policy was submitted, we started the groundwork for the legislative framework, which would support the implementation of the policy. We have started to look at what we would call the patchwork of legislation, and looking at where the deficits are, because there's lots of deficits, as you would understand. We're looking at a whole new piece of legislation, an omnibus piece of legislation, which will be implemented hopefully over the next 5 years, which is the span of the policy itself. So we will start with the low-hanging fruit and those areas that must be implemented right away because they're so critical to the comfort and dignity of older persons. Yes, to the Honourable Member of St. Andrew, we are aligned with the newest thinking in terms of legislative drafting at the CPC's office, and we are guided by a very, very modern approach to policies which are supported and informed by international authorities and current thinking in those authorities. So we will definitely, yes, be taking in heed of the words that we use, and that is the mark of a good draftsman. We've been in contact and engaging the stakeholders. We've had stakeholders. We are setting up a committee which will in fact steer the development of the legislation, and we'll be doing this through the Law Reform Commission because, as you know, this is transformative piece of statutory work, and therefore we hope that within the next few months that you will be able at least to see a first draft of that legislation. So I think that we're well on the way. This is a preliminary work. We've already compiled all the precedents that we think are useful for our purpose, and though the desk research is already, well underway.
Honourable Member, before we move away from the elderly, earlier you spoke of the possible expansion of the community elder care program. And while we would love to do so, obviously, as Minister indicated, the resources will be an issue. But as Minister indicated, we want to emphasize agent in place. And in an effort to do so, we are going to be embarking on a training program for unpaid persons who look after the elderly in your communities. For example, you may have a situation where the daughter of an elderly mother is looking after her who may have dementia. We want to be in a position to provide training for those persons so that they will be in a better position to care for these elderly persons. So within a few weeks' time, we definitely will be undertaking that program, and we are going to be doing it in partnership with the Barbados Community College, who would be involved in terms of providing tutors to do that training, as well as working closely with the Barbados Alzheimer's Association to also impart some degree of training as well. And it's all part of our effort to build partnerships, because obviously the government cannot do all. Thank you.
Sorry, very quickly. Back onto that as well. Now that IPS has spoken, it reminded me of two things, which is in relation to that training program where you may take care of your family, we're exploring the possibility of offering a stipend to a person who is already taking care of a family member but could be willing to take care of another two persons in the community as well. And I know that the Prime Minister has asked the Minister of Housing to explore the possibility of having a facility in every parish to be able to house, though not institutionalized, but house with the support of the seroptimists. And there's a conversation that the Minister and I are about to have as well. So there are things that are happening that would allow us to make legitimate and make meaningful and true the idea of aging in place.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Minister. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Minister, I'm not sure, but I don't think that anybody has raised the National HIV/AIDS Commission, and I believe that forms part of your ministry as well. I must tell you, as a practicing oral surgeon for many years, dealing with people who came to the office with HIV/AIDS was a lived reality for me. And I wonder what plans you have for the HIV/AIDS Commission. I must tell you that personally I think that you should expand and be a health and wellness commission rather than an HIV/AIDS commission. Because what that will do is, in addition to focusing on that narrow aspect, destigmatization, helping to encourage awareness and all of the other aspects of that the HIV/AIDS Commission work is, I think to be able to expand it to also encouraging people to live a healthier lifestyle, non-communicable NCDs, and be able to fight that battle as well, which is a major cost to the people of Barbados and to the government of Barbados. So I would like to first ask what plans, and then I want to take you straight to your estimates, because I know that you still have $813,000 available, according to what I see here, overall funds available as at December 31st, 2022 for HIV/AIDS Commission. As I see in your estimates that you've spent, funds released was 1.3 million, it looks like, and you still had 800,000. So that tells me that you're also not spending as much, which means that you can definitely expand to be able to get into more health and wellness rather than strictly HIV/AIDS Commission. But I'll wait for your response, and then we'll get into how you're going to spend this other 800,000 that was voted.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. I'm here telling the PS that you and I did not discuss this, and that your vision is very much in line with the vision that has become the thinking of the ministry. But I would ask Ms. Armstrong, who is the director of the HIV Commission, to please speak, and then the permanent secretary.
Good morning. Lynn Armstrong, Director Acting, National HIV/AIDS Commission. Thank you, sir. There is going to be a restructured role and function for the National HIV/AIDS Commission. Prime Minister, while doing our major estimates, did indicate that we should seek to have a new name and to expand our vision. We have skills that, having done the multi-sectoral program for HIV, that can be used for other life-threatening illnesses as well. And those are on the books. With respect to the remaining balance, some of those funds, unfortunately, are spent in the last quarter of the financial year because we celebrate, well, World AIDS Day is December 1st, and then we go into Love Safely Week. So we would have had a literary prose, poetry and prose competition. We have had a number of activities in this last quarter that quite a few of those funds will be expended before March 31st. With respect to I can give you some of the things that we have done. We've scaled up our social media presence on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We push HIV in sports quite a bit. So we have partnered with our road tennis. We've had a road tennis competition. We partner with the Domino Club. We partner with we've had celebrity football matches. We did quite a bit of advertising during World Cup football in Qatar. We would have sponsored and worked with CBC, and we would have had 2 new HIV commercials which were aired continuously throughout the period for the World Cup. And we have scaled up our visibility. But Minister, we take your point in terms of expanding the role and function of the Commission, and that work is indeed in train. And in terms of a new name, I take into consideration that to add wellness to it, we have to get away from the stigma of HIV, and we can go all-encompassing and add wellness.
Honourable Member, Ms. Armstrong just spoke to the activities that have actually been undertaken and will be undertaken, but I just want to make a correction to the earlier statement in relation to the actual amount of funds available. We have the actual amount of funds available as of. That's correct. Where we are now. Yeah. The actual amount of funds available as of the February 20th is $364,780, and we definitely, based on our projections, intend to spend about 90% of that remaining amount. Thank you.
So of course, and this is my second question, the reason I asked that is because when I was Minister of Housing, I guess technically I still have responsibility for housing as the senior minister, but when I was Minister of Housing, we actually did quite a few houses. And even although it was not a large number to be able to assist people, your clients, it's something that I was very proud of, because to be able to help people who, through no fault of their own, have a disease that they're having to live with for the rest of their life is a great thing. And I was very proud we were able to design a special facility and put good money to that. And the reason I asked about whatever funds was left is because if you have anything left back, I think that to put it to another house, because if we could add to that number, that complement of houses available for people who are having to live with this type of disease. Because let's get real, many times people who've been diagnosed but live in a family house, the family treats them badly. And I've seen that from experience in my own constituency, that I had to then struggle to find alternative accommodation for them because of a disease. And that obviously should not be. And so if you can see your way to be able to give assistance, I'm sure that the Minister of Housing and me as Senior Minister would give any assistance necessary. But so please check that, or any veerment that you would be able to have in advance, because it is a good program. And another thing that I would like to see you do more of as well is to be able to do more of those health fairs. Because I know that certainly housing, we had a health fair. MTW, we used to have them, but I don't know how many of the other ministries have those health fairs. Maybe you could advise, and if others don't have, maybe we could use our good offices minister to encourage our colleagues in their ministries to have those health fairs. But maybe you could tell me which ministries do and which ministries don't, and what success you've had with those.
Thank you, sir. You may not have been aware, but we actually did, the Ministry of Housing did actually have our man-aware intervention on Valentine's Day 2 weeks ago. You may need to
explain what man-aware is.
Sorry, man-aware is an intervention that was, it is an indigenous intervention where we do HIV awareness, we do HIV games, we do a barbershop. The concept of it was a man cave, where men can come, feel comfortable, and we have trained educators, HIV educators, who interact with the men, share information, and we also do condom demonstrations and distribution and whatnot. So you would have been there for the previous one, but we would have had one, as I said, on Valentine's Day. With respect to the housing program, sir, we still meet.
Sorry to stop you, but that's only one ministry. Well, the question I was asking is which other ministries do and which other ministries do not that could do?
So not every ministry has a vote now for HIV prevention. The Ministry of Culture under Prime Minister's office, they would have done an intervention for World AIDS Day. The Ministry of Labor, sir, they have funds for HIV prevention. Our ministry has its own vote for HIV interventions that would have been done by the National Assistance Board and whatnot. We no longer have a situation where each ministry has an HIV vote. So it will be easier for me to tell you the ministries that do. But I think in the rollout and the restructuring, we have to insist and try to ask the minister, through his good graces, to ask those ministries who no longer have an HIV vote to include one again, so that we can get the program up and running.
I guess what I'm trying to say is I want to change it from an HIV vote to a health and wellness vote.
So I was about to say, Minister, that the Prime Minister has actually pretty much given that directive. And when we return to the people next year, there will probably not be an HIV commission. In our estimates, you might see, I think we put $100 just to open the head for a behavioral unit, which would encompass the HIV and then in its wider manifestation, the other work that it's supposed to do. There was a paper that was written on this by Ms. Wiltshire when she headed the HIV Commission as well. So the thinking is not necessarily new, but now we have the political will to see it through. And so when we return next year, if we return next year to do well, then I will be in a position to report to you what we've done to be able to realize what you're saying, which is essentially the direction that I feel we must all go.
And if I may, Honourable Member, we would wish to take advantage of the many years that the National HIV Commission has been involved with behavioral change to use that as a basis for the operation of that new unit.
Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off, Ms. Armstrong, but it's clear this is very, very important work. It's unfortunate that all the ministries don't carry that head like they used to. And I need to encourage maybe the Minister of Finance, maybe something we'll speak about in the second reading speech when we get to that time. But it's very, very important work. And it's something that we need to continue. I believe it was conceptualized way back under the ONAFA administration, and it continues to do good work. And I salute all the good work that you've done together with the other agencies that assist. It's not something that we publicize a lot, but it's something that you have to appreciate that is good for a lot of people in Barbados. And obviously it's something that we must continue. But I thank you.
No, Minister, I think your question is so relevant, because when we had the conversations with the Ministry of Health, and just by thinking about COVID, our bigger challenge now in the country is NCDs and and so on, and the way we eat and our lifestyles. So I agree with you entirely that we need to have a much bigger vision. One of the things that I think is regrettable is that over the years we shrunk the HIV vote. I guess people felt that as the country became more aware of HIV, then there was less need to focus on it, though I don't necessarily agree. I think we should always maintain a focus on HIV. We've seen that an event has the potential to reverse all of your gains just like that. So we cannot drop the ball on HIV at all. And if I was actually concerned that during COVID, and the director could bear me out on this, that during COVID, we weren't able to get accurate, well, up-to-date numbers on HIV because people were so focused, as they should be, on COVID. So we now have to go back and get the numbers, the back numbers, we have to do more testing to get a more up-to-date number and to have the accurate number of persons in Barbados living with HIV. And why? Because we've seen during COVID again that HIV, especially if it's a case where a person may have HIV and is refusing to get the treatment for it, which is unfortunately also what happens because of the stigma. But the person then became more susceptible as a comorbidity to the issues related to COVID. And so we've been looking to address that. But I feel the focus really has to be on, because in many cases, if you're honest, HIV is no longer considered a life-depriving illness once you take your medication, right? And so in many other places, it is just a matter of taking care of yourself and taking care of your body and bringing that behavioral change, which is what we really need to have in a wider sense. And so, Honourable Member, I promise you when we return to this place next year, we will have ironed out vision in relation to that.
Thank you, Minister. I look forward to that. And as you quite rightly said, the access to medication. And sometimes you take your medication, we also have to have access to it as well. And isn't everybody that has the access sometimes. And that is also part of the whole equation. But again, I salute you and your team. It is important work and very, very relevant to life today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Christchurch West. Honourable Member for St. Michael North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Honourable Minister and team, thank you for your presentation thus far. And I want to applaud your efforts to not only amalgamate the services, the social services of our country, but to also ensure that the affairs and concerns of our elderly and the most vulnerable in our communities and our society are well addressed and taken care of. I'm a member of the Barbados Alzheimer's Association. I have been for many years. And I know that they pretty much would expect me to raise some questions on their behalf. I have heard some snippets in the presentation thus far of a good connection with them, an association and a working relationship with them. And one of the major issues that we as an association have faced for many years is the request for daycare facilities for those living with Alzheimer's. You can imagine that it is very difficult, and as some of you have alluded to it in your various presentations, you can imagine the amount of effort, time, financial resources that are required by caretakers to adequately supervise and care for a person who's living with Alzheimer's and dementia. It is a ruthless disease, that's the way I describe it. It is a ruthless disease. It really takes people from who they are and it diminishes them day by day almost to a shell of who they used to be. This is not only difficult for the person who has the disease, but I oftentimes tell people that it seems to be even more difficult for those who are taking care of those individuals. I know many persons who have Alzheimer's who are physically well in terms of their ability to function on a daily basis. Many of them can still walk and talk and do different things up to a certain point. But unfortunately, when they have those episodes, they can turn into another human being, another person altogether. And this poses a significant challenge for the person who is looking on and seeing that day-to-day and progressive deterioration and change. So my first question relates to daycare facilities. The Alzheimer's Association has been seeking a home where they can create that space where individuals who still need to work but have the duty of care for that loved one can still go and continue their normal course of employment, but there's a facility that is dedicated and specifically purposed, spec'd, to be able to offering day-to-day care for that individual until the caretakers, the primary caretakers, can come back home on evenings and then resume the responsibility for taking care of them. So the first question really relates to, are there plans, concrete plans, that can solve the issue of a daycare facility for the persons who are living with Alzheimer's? I will stop there, and I will answer a follow-up question to that first question after.
Honourable Member, I would ask the Director of the National Assistance Board, Ms. Walcott, to address your question, please.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Honourable Member. And thank you for so ably representing the Alzheimer's Association. I'm sure Ms. Brayton will be very, very, very proud and excited. The Alzheimer's Association, we do have a very strong relationship with the Alzheimer's Association. They are one of our partners. Provisions has been made within the estimates in the ministry for that association to have a significant amount of funds to help them with their functions and their activities. For the first time? Yes, it is always a start, it's a starting point. Yes, so at the last occasion when we would have met with our partners concerning the legislation, the Alzheimer's Association was also represented and would have also made their concerns known, and certainly they would be taken into consideration. Yes, the issue of daycare and getting those persons into facilities so that they provide one for dual purpose, providing care and supervision for those persons during the day, as well as giving families some respite. There has been some work done there through our daycare facility in the Pines. So persons who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's, when the daycare facility was functioning, and we plan to reactivate that very soon, we would have had some persons there which would have give some families a respite so that they can go on to work or their activities during the day. And there are plans in train to give more support to the Alzheimer's Association and particularly to their families. It's all part of building out, and it's also in the National Policy on Aging, building out a continuum of services in the community so that persons can continue to age in place. And we would keep saying this because this is really where we want to go as it relates to shifting from institutionalization and keeping persons in their familiar environments. So the Alzheimer's Association, we will continue to work with them. They are one of our partners. They have been very, very visible. They have been very, very vocal. One other area that we are also engaging in is the training as well. And the Alzheimer's Association has come on board, and they will be helping us to provide training on the ground to family members to get them to understand how to care, how to cope, and give them some of the skills. But we do recognize that the disease places a burden. We may not like to use that word, but it does place a burden on family members, and it takes a toll on most caregivers, and we are very mindful of that, and we will continue to work with the Alzheimer's Association to improve quality of life for their constituents.
Thank you very much for that. And I want to underscore, the last point that you were making, last statement that you were making, I really want to underscore how dastardly a disease this thing is, because it really does, it's heart-wrenching to see how people who were young and sprightly and active individuals who then deteriorate to the point where they're not able to function and to exist in I would say, in a humane way. And it does place a tremendous amount of strain on those who are observing and looking on to this. And I'm glad to hear that you mentioned the reactivation of the Pine facility. I would like to know when that is due to be reactivated, and also when reactivated, how do individual citizens get their loved ones either into that facility to be taken care of on a daily basis? What is the process, so that when my members of my constituency who are have loved ones that have dementia and have Alzheimer's, how do I then on their behalf get them into that care facility? And then what is the plan to expand that? Because the Pine facility, I'm not sure what the capacity is. Maybe you can share information on that. It's not very big, based on what I'm hearing, but are there any plans to make, let's say, satellite facilities available at different strategic points across the island? Alzheimer's is not going away. This is an issue, as you would know, that is continuing to expand, I would say, at an unfortunately rapid clip. And the longer people live, the more likely they are to have Alzheimer's. And this means, therefore, that we have to be strategically thinking about what else will we have to put in place in terms of physical infrastructure, strategies, etc., to ensure that we're taking care of persons who may encounter this disease. And a larger number of people are encountering it, unfortunately. So I want to find out about the Pine facility. When is it going to be activated? What is the capacity of it currently? And what are the plans to, how do we get persons into the facility? And then what are the plans for expansion of the physical infrastructure for care services of the elderly and those with Alzheimer's?
So you're correct, Honourable Member. There is a finite capacity at the facility. The facility can accommodate 30 persons. It is functioning right now. We've just shifted purpose because as we renovate the Vauxhall Senior Citizens Village, we have transferred some of those persons to minimize any threat to their safety in the construction area. As soon as we've completed Vauxhall, which should be completed by, we've projected for September, Senior Citizens Month, and we've relocated those persons, then the facility will be reactivated for daycare. The process for the admission to daycare is simple. It is the waiting time that may be prevent an obstacle given the finite capacity of 30 persons. There's an application form available at the National Assistance Board. There's an assessment done by the officer in charge, and usually if we can get a nurse to be a part of that assessment, then that is done, and based on that, it is the availability of space. So the major obstacle, as I said, will be the waiting time. You would have asked about the expansion of the service. For some time, we have entertained that idea, and we have engaged one of our charitable partners, and we've had initial conversation, but that would be an ongoing process because it has to be fit for purpose facility.
Excellent. How many follow-up questions do I have on one question, Mr. Chairman? Did I maximize? I have one more follow-up question on that question, so that's what I'm asking. Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really wanted to ask about the stipend. I heard, Minister, you alluded to a stipend for persons, and I think you spoke about it in the general context of persons, of taking care of the elderly. But I was wondering if any strategic consideration has been given relative to a stipend for those caring for those with Alzheimer's and dementia. You can appreciate that this is I don't want to say a little bit different from just general care of the elderly. It takes a tremendous amount of attention to care for someone who's living with Alzheimer's, because the episodes can come in and out pretty rapidly. And 1 minute the person is sitting in front of you watching television, and the next minute they're wandering. So there's a heavy amount of care heavy amount of care that goes into it. And I'm just wondering if there's any consideration, because I talk to a lot of persons who are caring for loved ones who have Alzheimer's, and it really takes a toll, financial and otherwise. So I'm wondering if any consideration has been given by the government to provide a stipend specifically for those persons who are caring. And I mean, it just has to come down to you be a certified person living with it, doctor can certify that, and you can clearly show that you are the primary caretaker of that person. What assistance is the government willing to give to you financially to help you to offset the costs associated with that endeavor?
Thank you, Honourable Member. So, as you said, I did say that we are considering. It's only a conversation, and so I can't give you a specific number, but it's only a conversation we're having. But with persons with Alzheimer's being a subset of the larger elderly population, I think when we break it down, as we should with any social problem, they say the punishment should suit the crime. I think the benefit should suit the person. And that there are cases where you may not necessarily need a stipend because as Alzheimer's becomes more advanced, giving you a couple $100 more makes no difference. You need professional care, and in the worst scenarios, you need to be institutionalized. And we're not a government that loves institutionalization, or at least very strong professional care. So I would imagine that the vast majority of people who will receive the stipend in the end will be for persons who are dealing with people who have Alzheimer's, because, I've heard of cases where people have tied their loved ones that they genuinely love to the bed, tied them to different places in the house, locked all the doors, and have gone out, in a way of making sure that the person stays safe. But the inherent risk in doing something like that is so great as well, For every action they say, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So we have to be careful. But I imagine that the greater majority of people would be people who are dealing with Alzheimer's. But I think we should have a system when we're able to finalize it, and I bring it to cabinet, and I'm sure you'll see it. When we finalize it, it must be a staged system, that gradually leads a person to be able to get the care that they deserve, which may not necessarily be a financial support. It could be more professional help. It could be institutionalization. It could be various things. But Alzheimer's patients would definitely be a priority.
My second question relates to welfare in particular. As a member of parliament representing my people, I often have cause to write letters to the welfare department on their behalf, seeking various levels of assistance. I must say to you that the length of time in terms of response to those requests leaves a lot to be desired. I think there's always, as from a child growing up, I used to see on my report card, there's room for improvement. And I do think that there is room for improvement relative to the welfare department. And I wanted to find out from you guys specifically, from the time a citizen approaches the welfare department or a member of parliament writes a letter on their behalf, what is the chronological process for that person to receive welfare assistance? What is the step-by-step? When does the assessment take place? How quickly can you get the assessment done? I'm asking that for the second part of the question, Mr. Chairman, that I'm going to ask one time, is how are you looking to improve that? I get the amalgamation of the social services, and I can see some efficiencies being built in there, but I'm specifically talking about welfare assistance requests. How do we get that process to be faster than it is today? Is there use of technology that can make it faster? What are the plans of the ministry right now to help us to enhance the process as it is today and move it to a stage where it is significantly shorter? I ask it that way because it gives you the opportunity to share with the public all that goes in to the welfare assistance requests. And then secondly, you have the opportunity to share how you're looking to reduce that time frame so that in the ideal world, as I tell my constituents all the time, when I write them a letter on Monday and it reaches welfare, that conceivably within 2 weeks, that they could either have at least a yes or a no, or start to receive some checks. I've answered the question. Proceed.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for the question that you asked and somewhat answered. The truth is, for many of us, we are all of us as MPs, we try to get the fastest response from the welfare department. You would be aware that in one particular instance for yourself, I've actually given you a response. I've also said that, there are many cases where people, there's a very difficult way to tell a person that they don't qualify. And that no matter how that is shared, people receive it painfully. So having said that, I think there are a number of things that we would have done during the course of the year to make it better. I would ask the Chief to expand on some of those things, but also to reiterate the challenges that the Welfare Department faces.
Minister, thank you for your question. I want to speak first to the process. And I know for most members of Parliament, it starts with your referral. But the referral in itself is not the application. It is you expressing an interest on behalf of your constituent. The onus is on the client to follow through with the application. Until they do that, we cannot enter their lives to conduct an assessment. And unfortunately, many persons believe because the MP referred them, they need to do nothing further. And we need to get that straight. They still have to come to the office or do the electronic application form so we can start the process. So sometimes the client may come back to you and say, Minister, I ain't hear nothing from welfare yet. But all we have in there is your referral, and although we've contacted them to come and make the necessary applications, they refuse to do so. So that would also impact on the length of time it takes to service them. In terms of the processes, I agree that the length of time is undesirable, but we would have explained before that we have some challenges. We're currently doing a deep dive into the payment process at the department to see if it unearths anything that we can fix. And from the front end, we're also, we will soon be utilizing the Pulse MIS system, which would allow us to streamline applications where they should go quickly and to whom they should go to. And so we can get those cases moving through the system and handled more speedily. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Now, in terms of the electronic application form, just as a follow-up, can I do this electronic application form on behalf of my constituent? You
can do that, but what we are currently preparing for you is an electronic referral form, so that as the client comes to you, you can collect some of that information that we would need and send off to us, and that would also make the process go quicker.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Honourable Member, before you go on, I think it would be useful to this Honourable Chamber if you could speak more to the deep dive that we are undertaking in respect of the Welfare Department. So I'm going to ask Mr. Andrew Pollard, who has been integrally involved in this process, to speak to it.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Honourable Member. Thanks, PS. All right, so at this point in time, there's a team from the Office for Reform of the Economic and Social Ministries, along with myself. We are conducting, as it were, the Prime Minister called it, a deep dive into the Welfare Department and its operations. What that deep dive is going to bring us to is linking the requests for assistance and the distribution of benefits to the account section. So before or at present, you have persons who are, say for a voucher or something like that, or you're getting checks, right? What we are looking to do very shortly is to be able to pay those funds into persons' accounts. That we think will help to, sort the problem somewhat. But the deep dive is also, as I said, looking at what happens at the front end and linking it to what goes on at the back end. So we are, as I said, automating payments not only to clients, but also to vendors.
Thank you very much. And my last question, Mr. Chairman, with a few parts, relates to going back to the elderly and their active aging. I would have held in my constituency a branch meeting, and the topic and the minister would have been the featured speaker on that occasion was successful aging. I'm pretty big on health and wellness, and I think it is important to all of us as individuals to do our part to reduce the impact of NCDs on our public purse. And therefore, I think as we are an aging society, that we need to ensure that we are encouraging our people to age successfully. So I want to find out specifically, I heard a lot of mention relative to the elderly policy, etc. I want to find out what are the strategies to help our people to age successfully. What are the programs that we're going to put in place to keep them active as they age? How are we going to be helping them by ensuring that we are creating environmental spaces for them, that we are rebuilding or restructuring our current physical infrastructure so that it caters to the elderly? How are we ensuring that our technological spaces are safe for them as well? Because there is a misconception that elderly people don't use technology. As we are going forward as a technologically savvy society, we know that the elderly will be interacting with and utilizing technology, but how are we ensuring that they're doing so in the safest way? So what programs in terms of training, etc., do your ministry contemplate will be needed to think? And ultimately, how are we protecting them from abuse? That is the last question that I will ask on that. So the health and wellness of our elderly, what are the strategies to ensure that they're aging successfully? How are we accommodating our built spaces, our environment, our technological spaces for their safety? And ultimately, how are we keeping them safe from all forms of abuse, which is a major problem that our elderly are facing? So that with that, Mr. Chairman, that would be my last question, I think, all in one.
I will ask the director to speak, and then I will speak after.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Honourable Member. Healthy and active aging. It underpins and it is critical to the whole issue of population aging across the spectrum, whether it's from UN, World Health Organization, and very much our national policy on aging. It is underpinned by healthy and active aging, which really speaks, and you would have summed it up, to the continued participation of older people in all spheres of activity. Very often, we continue to see older persons as just passive beneficiaries of social services. Older persons do not want to be seen like that. And when we speak about healthy and active aging, very often we concentrate and we focus only on on NCDs. You can have NCDs and you can still focus on active aging and aging actively, as we have seen. So on the ground level, you would have talked about activities and programs. One of the programs right now run by the National Assistance Board is what we call the Recreational Activities Program, where you have, right now we have about 21 centers in actual communities where persons can go and engage with their peers in a relatively safe environment in various activities, and that can go from exercise, line dancing, craft, where they can retool themselves as well. So the focus really is on the social and mental stimulation. COVID would have caused that program to lose some momentum because we had to close those centers, given that older persons were the most susceptible and vulnerable to the disease. We have restarted that program. Up to the time that we would have closed, we would have catered to approximately some 500 older persons. We're now rebuilding, and we're just around 200 or so. The National Assistance Board, through our estimates, would provide for the administrative costs, and the participants then provide their own materials. We work very, very closely with our partners and stakeholders in the communities because none of these buildings which is used for this program is owned by the National Assistance Board. They're either in church halls or in community buildings. So we utilize the community buildings during the day. So we intend to expand that program, getting more persons out, using the media, and getting persons really sensitized and aware. Because as much as those programs are in the community and they are there are still some persons that are unaware. So we have to get the information out there and do more sensitizing. The national policy on aging is underpinned, as I said before, with the whole focus on healthy and active aging, which speaks again about keeping persons in their communities and aging well. As we look at our life expectancy, the healthy life expectancy and life expectancy, there's a gap. Our healthy life expectancy lags beyond the general life expectancy. So it says that our society and older persons, yes, are predisposed to health challenges. Notwithstanding that, they can continue. So across the policy, it speaks to the pandemics and threats, natural disasters, all those things that we have to take into their consideration. And also it speaks to the finances about older persons as well. Going forward, we will be working very, very closely. Again, we reiterate that we cannot do this work alone. There are a lot of entities out there which cater to older persons, whether it's the polyclinics, the church. There are a lot of entities out there, and we intend to strengthen our relationships with our partners and get an actual activities. So while at the macro level, we're looking at the legislation and the policy, on the ground, we're going to be pushing our activities for older persons and getting them re-engaged and engaged post-COVID.
Honourable Member, I know you're very concerned. I'm thankful for the support in this area. I know you're very concerned about issues pertaining to the elderly. And yes, you did invite me to speak at your branch on this particular matter, so thank you for that. I think we have to be very logical about these things. When we say age successfully, we have to tell people what we mean by it, and in the ministry, I know we have to be very clear in our understanding as well as our communication about what we mean about aging successfully, or aging, or active aging, or aging in place, and all the other, development nomenclature that we use. What does it really mean when you try to operationalize it? And for me, it's multifaceted, but I'm thinking of three main areas. We have to make sure people are in good physical health. We have to make sure that they maintain their cognitive ability. And we have to try to help people maintain social relationships. And if we can do those three things, then we would really make a difference. Social relationships are so important for older people. And I was reading 2 nights ago, I was reading a study that was done very recently, and it was done about the changes in Japan and China, both of which, like Barbados, are experiencing serious aging in their societies as well. They have a whole set of facilities available, and in fact, at some point, I'm going to ask the staff to visit maybe Japan, because I know we were having conversations with the ambassador, and see what they're doing. But both of those countries have also had policies that, lend themselves to a situation where, just like Barbados, they don't have enough young people. China had the one-child policy for a long time, and now China is actually busy doing assistive reproductive programs to help people get more children. And Japan had a very strict immigration policy, and now they're loosening that to allow people to come in because, when we've done it very well in Barbados as well. We have allowed people to age, and, we've improved or increased life expectancy. Unlike those two countries, though, in Japan and China, I think in Asian countries, older people tend to be healthier than Caribbean people who live longer. So we have a situation where we've reduced mortality, but unfortunately, we've increased morbidity. And I think a lot of that about aging successfully, you have to start talking about that at schools, about the food we eat, because what manifests when you get older, as I've come to realize, are oftentimes the things that you experience when you're young. Like I have an injury from playing football that all of a sudden has re-emerged in my life. And the foods, when you see that we're banning sugary products, the minister who sits next to you, that we're banning sugary products in schools, that's going to be important. Imagine the food we eat. I saw Sir Hillary did a study where he said that we had something in our DNA lineage that came from slavery because of all the brain and just the amount of salt and carbs we consume, that the Caribbean black has a different physiological buildup than the average black man somewhere else. And a lot of that has to do with how we eat as well, so that by the time you get older, these things manifest. So when I talk about active aging, I talk about having this conversation at primary school and preparing for it from primary school and throughout our whole system. And then, of course, COVID has been like a very skilled sniper for old people, you know, and it's taken out a lot of older people, and now they're afraid. Many people don't want to come out, they don't want to socialize, they're coming out gradually. And so I do think two things. People will come out for something they would enjoy or for something that would give them some benefit, and we've seen that. And therefore, we have to have greater programs. If we do all these things that you've asked about, people would want to come forward, you know, because there's some benefit to coming forward. But if you come forward and there's nothing, there's no provision for care, there's no support for you, you know, you don't get any help with your issues, or if you feel you're exposed to COVID for nothing. There was also a program that Minister Lane, I don't know if he's online, but Minister Lane and I, we were discussing this program called ElderNet, which we were discussing with the former MP for many times, Hamilton Lashley, in relation to having a system where you communicate, you know, you set up a free internet system for older people, you teach them how to use it, they log in, and then they can talk to one another online. They don't have to physically leave the house. That's to make sure that they maintain both the cognitive abilities, but also the social relationships as well. But then there are a few things very quickly that I think we have to work on. We have to work on our food, what is available for people to eat, and the cost and the quality of it. We have to work on the negative stereotypes associated with getting older. Many older people do not need help. They're just older. And if you're all lucky, we will get older. Not every older person has to be in an institution. Not every older person has an NCD. So there's not, and I think the director spoke about this person being this passive recipient of goods and services, which is not always the case. They're active agents in their lives. And we need to create a space where older people can work, because we have more older people soon enough. Then we have younger people where they can work, where they can earn, and so on. So I agree with you, Honourable Member. I also note that you do these exercise programs in your communities. I would like to implore all of us, including myself, to be able to do some of those things, because it won't always be the state. To do some in our families, to do some through the community groups and so on. If we all pull together on this, if it becomes a whole of country approach, then we have a much better shot than if we leave it to the ministry and to the government.
Excellent. Well, in closing then, I just want to thank you and applaud you, Minister, and your team for the responses to the questions. Very, very, very good responses. You have a clear plan and a strategy, and I believe that we're in good hands with your team, yourself at the helm, for ensuring that all of the vulnerable people in our society are well taken care of now and well into the future. So thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I just want to intervene here for a short while just to remind members of the time frames involved. We have a number of members who have indicated they want to participate, and I therefore want you to be guided and to exercise some brotherly love, knowing that your colleagues want to participate in this session, and we have certain time frames in place. So be so guided. I would not want to intervene again to have to shorten any person's contribution. All right, Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I want to congratulate the team from People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs. The task before you is a mammoth one. And in listening to you, Minister, responding to the issues of poverty, the welfare department, the issues pertaining to elder care and so on, I really want to endorse the fact that dealing with this is going to be a whole of country movement. It's the only way that we can actually change what are the conditions on the ground. And therefore, I would be interested in knowing, first of all, what is your thinking in terms of how we're going to be able to do whole of country mobilization? Because I think it is important. In the area of elder care, as I think someone pointed out, everybody is going to get old at some time. In St. James South, I had put on a elder care training program, went to open it, just intended to stay to open it and leave. But the first 3 sentences caught me, and I sat and listened, and I went to every class after that, because I recognized that I needed in my own household, that my mother was going to reach a stage where I would need to know these things so that I could care for her in her older age. And it brought me to the conclusion that one of the things that we need to do is get elder care training in every business, every school, so that we are creating nurturing and supportive environments in the home for the elderly people. But my first question is about the whole of country mobilization. If you have ideas or plans, or what would you like to see happen to make something like that a reality?
Thank you, Honourable Member. So that's a very good question. And the truth is that this is really the only thing that is going to work. Like, nothing else is going to work. By whole of country, we have to involve not only the ministry and the government departments, we have to go to the private sector, the NGOs, community-based organizations, families, individuals. This thing has to become part of our everyday conversation. And people have to feel that it is not the government's problem, but that it is a country's problem, and also a country's opportunity. And to the extent that we can shift the thinking from it being a burden or a problem to the potential opportunity, I think is where we have to do most of our work. Now, we've established in the ministry several committees, you know, and these committees are multi-sectoral. Up until yesterday, I took a paper to Cabinet in relation to another area, but where we were looking at bringing together persons from the faith-based organizations, the NGO movement in its wider sense, working closer with the Ministry of Labor to get across the point, pulling together all these committees. I've also said that, as I did again talking to you in Haynesville, but also in the other places that we've done that work, a lot of the conversations that we're going to need to have are just regular one-on-one conversations. You know, when you're doing community work, if you're trying to do what Rianne spoke to, which is like a participatory poverty assessment, you go to the people, right? As part of a PPA, you go directly to the people. And there are many communities, and you have to respect it. It is what it is. There are many communities that you really will get no forward unless you go to the gatekeepers in the communities. That's just the truth. And we have to know who the gatekeepers are in the various communities. Oftentimes, they're not the churches anymore. Oftentimes, they're not the family members anymore. Oftentimes, surely not a government institution. Oftentimes, they're people who may look like ordinary people sitting by a block, maybe by a shop, people who actually control, you know, the power in certain communities. We have to bring them in too. And that the role of the state is to adapt itself and to make itself flexible to be able to source information from all these people and to be able to allow these people to help us in the process. I've often found that people who the country has written off, for whatever reason, are oftentimes the best people to deliver a social message. I found, as we did when we were discussing persons with disabilities, that people who we expect to stand up and help people in the bus, or people who are carrying heavy bags in their communities, you expect some man in a nice collar and tie and his car to jump out and help you. No. It is the boy on the block who will get off the block and come and help you carry home those bags. Yet we use people for certain purposes, and in the purposes of development, we leave them out. It is an irreconcilable contradiction, and it only serves to be injurious to the country in the long term. And so the question for me is, how do I pull all of these people to be part of the development process, including the traditional actors, including the stakeholder organizations, and then simple things like running programs on GIS, running programs on TV, running programs on social media. I feel we got to get the message back into the school. I will close by telling you this, Honourable Member. I gave a graduation talk in my constituency. And it was to the children who did 11 plus. It was just my area. And I asked them, like, how many of y'all have relationships with your grandparents or older people? They said, we don't deal with that. I said, how many of y'all do chores on mornings? Like, you know, sweep the house, take out the animals, you know, do something. We don't deal with that. So then I said to them, well, the problem isn't here. The parents were on one side, the family, the children on another side. I said to the parents, said, what y'all doing? They're like, you know what I mean? What are we raising if we don't teach our children some very basic responsibility and basic values? And there was only 2 parents in a crowd of about 60 that felt that what I was saying made sense. But, you know, we have to raise our children in a way that teaches them some responsibility so that when they become adults, when they become the heads of the NGOs, the bankers, the lawyers, the doctors, the guys on the block, that they are able to receive this kind of message. The challenge is that a lot of our people, in many cases, haven't been given the message. So I know, look, I feel that there's just so much work to do in this regard. Because we could call it a whole country approach if we want, but unless we bring the country to a point where they think that they are partners, and both the persons to my side and behind me would tell you that I keep making the point that everything now is about partnership. The ministry has to do its work in partnership. And then right as I end, Honourable Member, I think one of my persons would like to share a few words or no?
You have 1 minute.
Ms. Wiltshire, please.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, we recognize that there are programs that must be developed so that the whole country sees it as part of their role in helping the aging and to keep the rights of older persons, which include being active, being healthy. And we recognize that you need these strategies. The policy itself is the 2023 to 2028 National Policy on Aging for Barbados, which was developed by the consultants of the university, Professor Dwayne Devonish and Dr. Lawrence Nurse, with support from PAHO. And it has not only set out the core areas of investigation and structure, which will be financial and economic security, social security, health and health systems, physical and built environment, social environment, legislation, long-term care, which is another of our concerns as more and more people get older with chronic diseases, and of course, pandemics, disasters, and emergencies. But they've not only just put those on the table, they've also set out a very defined and detailed strategic plan which goes over the 5-year span of the policy. And in that strategic plan are the activities that will need to garner that whole country approach, because legislation may be one aspect, but of course there is public education, there is public information and campaigns, and because what we're doing is changing behaviors, changing attitudes, and therefore what is seen in those over the 5 years, year 1, year 2, year 3, is building on that whole holistic approach to the end of the 5 years. Now, it's a very ambitious, but then again, we have to be ambitious. We have to set our sights at the stars. And about resources, you say, okay, it's ambitious. What about resources? It is expensive, but as the minister will always say, it's more expensive if we don't. So this is what we're looking for, leaning for. Of course, during the course of it, there will be always frequent reviews, probably preferably every year, so that we know where we are going. And if we need to, we tweak and start again. But yes, it's everybody's business from the day you're born. Aging is your business. And aging itself is not a problem. It is a condition. It is only when there are obstacles in the way that it becomes a problem. And that is what the policy is aiming to fix and address.
Another question, Minister, is the issue of elder abuse. Is a very pervasive thing within our society and growing, and that abuse is sometimes covert and overt, whether it is children, adult children living in a home and not contributing to the home and leaving the burden on elderly parents to try to work out how to pay the bills and keep things going that they themselves will use. And then there's the overt where they misuse pensions, misuse their property, funds, etc. My concern with the legislation you're seeking to bring, I'm looking forward to it. I'm not sure how are we going to be able to get the reports. Would parents be willing to report when there's abuse going on against them? How would something like that be dealt with?
I would let the Chief, the Director of National Assistance speak, and Ms. Wiltshire.
Elder abuse, yes, very, very real. As you would have said, pervasive, but very underreported as well. We get approximately 10 referrals per month for cases of elder abuse. Up to the time we get them, we call them allegations, because very often you can get those referrals, but when you go and you do the actual assessment and meet with the families and so on, you see that is something different. But as I said, it's underreported. Unfortunately, it is still very, very much seen as a private matter. So even though you can go to households, and usually it is referrals, sometimes the referrals come not only from other entities with whom the elderly interact, but it can come from family members living within the household as well, and who often try to do it very, very anonymously. It can also come from neighbors in the community who do not really want to be identified. Sometimes you can go to do your assessment, and you have to make several visits before you can build that trust, or before you can get any information, because very often you're told, well, it has nothing, this is a private matter, it has nothing to do with you all, or it is denied. We also have to be very mindful that we do no harm to older persons, because realistically, after we have done our assessment and we have gone, we leave that person in the household with the perpetrator. However, there are cases where, whether it's done intentionally, unintentionally, overtly, or covertly, it is abuse. But very often you have to work with the families. Some of them are not doing it intentionally. The representative earlier would have talked about Alzheimer's and the whole issue of dementia. Sometimes families cannot cope, so you may go and you may see that there's restraint. And that is done not to abuse, but for the safety of the person if they are not at home. Notwithstanding that, there are persons who will blatantly abuse. And particularly so when we see a lot of it when it comes to finances and it comes to property. Yes, there's the neglect and the abandonment as well, but very often, sometimes families are at their wits' end, they are not coping, and it's not that they want to abandon the older person, whether it's at the hospital or wherever, but they have just reached the end of their theta. So even as we're talking about legislation, remember we cannot legislate behavior. And the legislation will really for those persons who continue as it relates to property and finances. So we have to balance it. So while we're even doing the legislation, we have to work on behaviors. The question was asked, can we teach people to care? And that is what we have to look at. How do we get families to care for the older persons? And it cannot begin at the point where the person becomes old. So there's still a lot of work to be done with families. We also have to look at what services and what support we can give to families, whether it's daycare, which serves to give the caregiver some respite, as well as to give the older person some respite from their caregiver as well. We also have to look at going forward, and one of the plans that we will have is the whole issue of respite care for older persons as well. One of the things that we are finding is that we are getting a lot of older persons who live alone, or two older persons living together, and we have elderly caring for elderly and gentlemen just don't know how. So that's how you get the neglect or the self-abuse as well. So we have to look at the broad spectrum of abuse. And even though while we are waiting, we are clamoring for the legislation, we have to work on persons and their behaviors and where they need help.
That was my last question.
Sorry, Chair. I don't know if Mr. Wiltshire wanted to add.
Yes, thank you, the Honourable Member of St. James South. As the Honourable Member of St. Thomas will tell you, every day she gets reports on elder abuse, every single day, numerous reports. The legislation will try to cover the field of such abuses, whether it be emotional, financial, physical. It will cover the field of abuse, and of course, the state has fairly limited opportunity for intervention at this time because, unlike with children, which are minors, the persons have to be, consulted and all of the whole process. But what we are looking at is mandatory reporting, which could then be investigated, and each case would then be given the kind of attention that it needs and the remedy that it would require.
Then, on that question, look, on elder abuse, as we have done with child abuse in the child protection legislation, and you will see in the coming child justice bill, as we've done in the legislation that is pending for persons with disabilities, and the ministry's orientation on training, education, and support for families, and to do all those things. But after all of those things, and people still continue to abuse elderly persons, there will be a zero-tolerance approach in the ministry. There has to be a zero-tolerance approach when it comes to this, and that's the only way we're going to be able to address it. So I think that the public could look forward to us being a lot more stern, having done the necessary work to get people ready, but having done that, zero tolerance.
Thank you, Honourable Minister, and also Honourable Member for St. James South. Honourable Member for St. George South.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me offer my congratulations to the Minister, my very good friend and his team. I won't be long based on time, but I have a lot to say in a very short space of time. But I want to start, Mr. Minister, by bringing some clarity to something that was discussed yesterday, if you permit me to, Mr. Chairman, and also something that was mentioned today. Yesterday we spoke about the dearth of housing within people's empowerment. But I want to thank the ministry and this government, and this is a story to be told. We have housed over, and Mr. Potter, my good friend, we became very good friends as a result of Hurricane Elsa. We've housed over, I think you've housed over 200 persons in this country as a result of the effects of Hurricane Elsa and the freak storm. And I think the public needs to know this. So when we speak about the lack of housing and people's empowerment can't find housing, I think that is one of the main reasons why, and you have done a remarkable job in assisting this government, and of course the role that I hold as Minister of Housing. I want to thank you. I also want to add some clarity as well to something that was said this morning, because again, it's a story to be told. We have spent over the last 4 years, between 2018 and 2022, $2.1 million on persons living with HIV and AIDS, this government. And while we have an excellent partnership with the Ministry of People's Empowerment and Elder Affairs, this money was spent on over 40 persons. 1 million in terms of finding accommodation, and another $1 million 1.1 million in terms of houses under construction. Over 40 persons living in SIB. Another story to be told. But I want to go into this whole aspect of community elderly care. That's one question, and my second one would be to the minister directly. But community elderly care, we have a sector that we call part of the third sector, the church. And I want to know, how have we, I know we have embraced the church, but I want you to tell the country, how have we embraced the church in terms of utilizing those built assets? We just approved the building of a new geriatric hospital, and persons may think that that hospital can house all of the elderly people, but that's impossible. And I know you have a vibrant community elderly care program, and you mentioned that yesterday, but I'm specifically targeting the church and the role, the type of partnership you have with the church in terms of providing not only elderly care, but also child care. And I will ask my next question so you answer all at one point in time, and I have to go to a 12:15 meeting. I want to thank you, DPM, for giving me the opportunity. How are we honoring our international commitment on the rights of the child? And how does that relate to helping children in Barbados? And I know, Minister, you have a story to tell the country. And my final question deals with persons living with disability. And this is directed to my very good friend, Mr. Hollingsworth, as well. I have a lot of friends sitting over here, man. Mr. Hollingsworth, this question came to me from a constituent this morning. Is a wheelchair-bound person. And it's not a hard question. I know you have constraints. I'm not putting you on the spot. That's not what I'm here to do. But I'm here for you to tell the country what are some of the constraints. Because the person said to me that the disability transport, they were denied because there's a shortage. The disability transport usually takes person to the polyclinics on a monthly basis for their routine checks. And I know you have constraints, so you can tell the country what are you doing to address some of those constraints, because we have a lot of persons living with disability across the country who depend on that transportation on a monthly or weekly basis. Those are my questions, and I'm hoping if we have more time, I will come back with some accolades, because this ministry has done tremendous work. And in closing, I am one who will put up my hand to say that the people of St. George, they have benefited from the welfare transformation over the last 2 years, Mr. Minister and team. And I want to congratulate you. The work that you are doing at the Glebe, what's the name now, the new name? Freddie Miller's facility. And the people of St. George, they have asked me to tell you, thank you for the service that you have provided to those persons who depend on welfare. That is only over the past 4 years though, but prior we had many challenges. But I have seen a rebirth of that unit, and it has benefited the people in St. George. I thank you and keep up the good work.
Thank you. May I proceed, Chair? Thank you, Honourable Member. I hope that you do have time to hear the responses to these very important questions. The first, I think, was in relation to housing generally. I must also tell you, and Senior Minister, thanks, I think it would be unfair and untrue for me to suggest that we haven't been able to receive housing as a result of the relationship. It is just that the point we're making is that the pressure on the system is such, and even within the private sector, there are persons who just do not wish to have a relationship with either the department, the ministry, or the people whom we represent. That's just the truth. In relation to the relationship, I don't know if the PS or Mr. Pollard would want to speak about that relationship over time since Elsa, but I think in a much more philosophical sense, The truth is that the ministry and your ministry must work together. We have an amount in the ministry every year. This year, I think it's 4-point-something million for disasters. So in the event of a disaster, we are able to provide food and provide housing, accommodation, at least pay for it, for persons who might be affected by a disaster, whether it is Elsa, as was the case a couple years ago, or some unforeseen event. Again, this is a case where the ministry and the government has been fairly forward-thinking, because we cannot be talking about the unpredictable nature of climatic events and not prepare for them. The PM says sometimes that you should never find yourself reacting to a situation you should see coming. And we do know that climatic events, and dastardly ones, are always going to be coming given climate change. So I would ask the PS just to share maybe a few of the numbers in relation to where we're doing with which we call kind of like social housing, but disaster relief housing. I don't want to get into any details, except to say that we've been able to house persons, make sure that they were accommodated, while the Ministry of Housing works assiduously to provide them with housing.
Thank you, Minister. And at this juncture, I really wish to commend the officials in the Ministry of the Housing and Lands, as well as my team, for working collaboratively in ensuring that the persons who were impacted by Hurricane Elsa were provided with accommodation at very short notice. We always talk about government working in silos, but in a situation where we needed a national effort to facilitate these persons, the relevant officials were able to work very quickly and very closely to ensure that these persons were provided with temporary accommodation. So I'll give you some figures in relation to what transpired in July, over the last 19 months or so, subsequent to the passage of Elsa. The actual expenditure, the overall expenditure on the accommodation for the households who were impacted by Elsa is actually $4.6 million since July 2nd, I think 2021. And the initial accommodation of those persons, the number of households that were initially accommodated were 93 households for a total number of 295 persons. There were a number of accommodation sites, 3 sites in terms of community accommodation. We had the Spiritual Baptist, well, I won't go into all those details, but the total number of accommodation sites amounted to 52. So there are still a number of persons in temporary accommodation. We have been working very closely with you, the Ministry of Housing and Lands, in terms of facilitating these persons. So we will continue to work closely with your ministry, Honourable Member, to ensure that the persons continue to be accommodated and are put back into their respective houses. Thank you.
Thank you. That's my Honourable Member specifically about how we're working with the church. I was briefly, very briefly when I assumed the ministry, I thought I was minister responsible for the church and ecclesiastical affairs, but apparently I wasn't. That's the honor given to the Honourable Member for St. Peter. And so we've been having conversations. In fact, the third sector and myself have had meetings. We've had several meetings with the Honourable Member. I know that the Honourable Minister before me, the member for St. Thomas, has done tremendous work, given her relationship with the church and other religious groups, to be honest. She's done tremendous work in this regard with working with partners in the church and being able to offer support. The question is, I think I can say this in summary without getting into too much details. If there is a group that is offering support to the elderly persons, they should contact the ministry so that we could partner with them in a way that allows them to do more or to go deeper, but allows us to reach wider people. So if that institution is the church, or if it is some other NGO or a CBO, or if it is an individual, I want to know who they are so that we could deepen that relationship. I think your second question was in relation to the disabilities, I think. There was one on disabilities. and then the other one on the rights of the child. So I would let the director of the NDU speak to the question on disabilities.
Thank you, Minister. John Hollingsworth, Director of the National Disabilities Unit. To answer your question, Honourable Member, for a very long time, the National Disabilities Unit was without a vehicle, an operational vehicle. That is a vehicle that have a lift to transport persons with wheelchairs. Government, through the National Disability or the National Disabilities Unit, through government, was able to purchase 2 Nissan Vans, 15-seater buses, with adaptable lifts to be able to transport persons with disabilities. And that relieved persons or wheelchair users tremendously in seeking to get to their medical appointments. Because what transpired before was that these persons were at the mercy of the private providers who would charge as much as $200 for a trip to the hospital or to a polyclinic. So that significantly relieved them of that exorbitant expense. And it has even gone further in that that cost has even doubled since the last rate to taxi operators. Having purchased those vehicles, we went with the smaller version because the bigger bus that was in the possession of the National Disabilities Unit was a 30-seater Nissan civilian bus. This was way too large, and the lift on this bus was not in operation. This particular vehicle could not reach the homes of persons with disabilities, particularly wheelchair users. So the investment in the Nissan Vans allowed us to go to those homes, practically to the front door of those persons. There is still a great demand because over the past year, we would have seen about 60 requests for assistance with transportation by persons with disabilities to their medical appointments. They don't only ask for transportation to medical appointments, they also ask for transportation to recreational events, transportation to church, transportation to the beach, etc. But given the limited capacity that we have, we had to prioritize. And what we have sought to do basically is to provide the assistance to persons who are in a life or death situation, persons who require transportation because they need to get dialysis treatment, persons who require transportation because they need to collect oxygen because they have respiratory challenges. So we seek to prioritize them because if they are without that transportation, it is highly likely that they can die. We do have some issues, although we would have acquired this transportation, and I must add here that we are in the process of acquiring another bus. I was hoping that we would have had it since last week, Friday, but in speaking to the garage, we're supposed to get it today or early next week. Nevertheless, we will acquire a new one, another one, by next week, and therefore we'll be able to extend our services to include also persons who want to participate in recreational events and go to church and other things like that. Currently, we only offer the service on weekdays, Mondays to Fridays, but we're hoping that once this bus is acquired, that we'll be able to extend that to weekends. In addition, because they work so hard, the 2 buses that we have in possession, there's sometimes disruptions in the service because they obviously have to get service, and secondly, sometimes because of the demand on the lift that is part of the vehicle, they sometimes malfunction and we have to get them fixed. So there could be some disruptions. And you would have said transportation once a week, but sometimes some persons, especially dialysis persons, they have to get to their appointments like 3 times per week. We seek to facilitate them. Right now on our roll, we have near 30 persons that we transport on a weekly basis to ensure that they retain a level of health and livelihood that is satisfactory to them and to their families. Without that particular service, I think that we could be into a serious problem, a very serious problem, because persons can't afford the transportation and then their health could be at risk.
Thank you. I'm going to ask, with Minister's permission, Mr. Lee Rose, the Social Policy Advisor, to speak on the question relating to meeting of Barbados commitments on the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. Mr. Rose?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, PS. Lee Rose, Social Policy Advisor. It should be noted, colleague, that Barbados last reported to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child in 2016, with a number of urgent actions arising from that report delivered to the country in 2017. The urgent actions, I speak about them because then that relates to your question rather. There were a number of them. The need to expedite child-friendly child protection legislation based on the best interest of the child, that's one. The need to improve child-specific data collection and analysis. The need for a greater alignment of the legislative framework with the rights of the child. The establishment of alternative care mechanisms for children in need of protection. And this speaks to a greater emphasis on foster care and adoption. Also, the need to amend our national approaches to juvenile justice, and the development of a national action plan for child protection. Those are some of the elements that came out of the report. I'm pleased to say that we've worked on the vast majority of those actions in collaboration with these various sectoral interests and the National Committee on the Rights of the Child. And you will hear a lot more about that early in the upcoming financial year. And in terms of our reporting process on the rights of the child, it should be noted that we have opted to implement the simplified reporting procedure for our national reporting on the rights of the child. The name, as it suggests, is a simpler, less onerous report process in terms of the human and other resources needed to comply, and it is a more focused exercise, and it allows for our national reporting to be fast-tracked for review and then further action. In terms of a date, because naturally that would be a natural question you would ask, the UN has advised that there's no current date for our reporting process, but we in the ministry have all our mechanisms in place for when the Human Rights Office indicates Barbados' report. And partially the reason I understand is because many state parties have had issues related to COVID and related to their reporting, so that's pushed back the process. So I'm hoping that that answers your question.
Please use the mic.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Right, just to bring the matter closer to the ground, I'm going to ask Ms. Roseanne Richards, the Director of Child Care Board, to speak to any specific issues in relation to meeting our international commitments. Ms. Richards?
Good afternoon, everyone. Roseanne Richards, Director of the Child Care Board. To add to what Mr. Rosewood has stated, when we were drafting the new child protection legislation, we made every effort to ensure that we would have been in compliance with the tenets of the Conventions on the Rights of the Child and any other international conventions that we would have signed on to, particularly to ensure that the welfare of the child is taken care of and promoted, to ensure that children are provided with a level of care and protection, that they're protected from neglect and abuse. We also have actively in our ministry a CRC committee that looks at all the different clauses or tenets of the convention to ensure that we are in compliance. And we are guided on a daily basis by the convention as well as the efforts in the new legislation. I mean, it's not enforced as yet, but at least what we had working with before is very skeletal, and we're aware of what we have to do to move forward, what's in the best interest of the children of Barbados.
Thank you, Mr. Minister and team. I almost forgot I have a long-standing friend, Ms. Richards, as well in this team. But let me end off by thanking this very important ministry. You have presented exceptionally well. You're doing a lot of work that this country needs to know about. And I also want to thank the former minister who led the charge, member for St. Thomas, for the good work that she pioneered in this ministry. And I know the welfare department is better as a result of the work that the member for St. Thomas pioneered to transform that section. And we are indeed better as a people in St. George. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over to you again.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. George South. Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
No, I complain.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I shall be very brief because I recognize that other honourable members will wish to speak. And I was just winking at Dr. Wiltshire to say to her, we're going to set up a forum next week that we could probably go on the calling program or whatever to be able to help to send some of the messages from here. That is the excellent work that this ministry has been doing. And I want to commend the Honourable Minister and his team for what they have been doing. And rather than talk anymore about the policy and all that, which will be unfolding, I would just want to raise two small areas so that the other honorable members can have their contributions done. And the first one is to do with palliative care and the excellent work that the institution is doing under Ms. Deanne Sobers and her team, because Barbadians are not conscious as to what suffering families endure at the last moments of their lives. And I think that that is an area that we need to place emphasis on, whether it is an aged person or a young person. It is an area that even the now Chief Medical Officer, sometime in 2000, I think, and 12, had raised the matter, but because so many people are dying from the comorbidities and all that, the last days of dying, where caregivers are all drawn out, they're about to lose it. We need to place more emphasis as a country on palliative care. And I'm just going to leave that there because it is something that we could discuss on another occasion in the interest of time. The only one I wanted to really speak about, and I believe this is most critical as well, is Partnership for Peace. It is one of the most wonderful programs that I have seen. Barbadians are angry, some of them, and we can understand some of the reasons why. And COVID has exacerbated a really bad situation subsequent to the project when it started, with males who had been engaged or perpetrated females and had to go before the court of law. And the court system with the magistrates and the personnel there, they coordinated a program called the Partnership for Peace to be able to help those men over the challenges that they have, and in order for them to conform with the instructions, to be able to attend sessions for counseling and all that, and to be able to speak about their aggression and what had led to their actions. The results, as far as I am aware, have been really very, very successful. Excuse me. And the end part of it is that whatever the infraction would have been in relation to beating the women and pulverizing them and not giving the child maintenance, so they will then be able to have it cleared or expunged from their character record. It has been going exceptionally well previously, but unfortunately the ministry doesn't have the human resources to be able to do it from the point of view, those two persons who were assigned before have now been promoted to other departments and nobody is filling in there. And to my mind, it is so critical because every day we are seeing so much violence, especially partner-based violence, men beating women and sometimes women beating men. And therefore, I think it is important. But the critical point I wanted to make, when I'm raising it very briefly, is because when the magistrates and the other personnel in the court system found out what was going on, the males who had gone through and had graduated, I had the privilege of attending one of the graduation ceremonies, and I felt so proud to see that those men who were so rough and tumble and beat up the women were so quiet and embracing in the exercise. And I don't think they would have gone back before the court because I believe then the character reference would have the information on it. But the point is, the males said it would be wonderful if the females in Barbados get that opportunity because, Mr. Chairman, you can say what you like. Women are very aggressive too. And I will not sit back and let a man hit me and let it go. But sometimes the women are not getting the child maintenance. They're probably looking at another partner because there's no money coming in, or they're not being treated well, or the partner they have might have had sex and they have several women. I don't know. And of course, the men are saying to the court system, the women are the ones who provoke us and sometimes cause us to react the way we do, hence the outcome. And I think that this is something too that the ministry needs to work more assiduously with because it has not been functioning for a while. But it is extremely critical. No life lost is worth it. When we have so many families, and a lot of Bajan men have a lot of different children for different partners, and so some women as well. But if there are differences in the family, there has to be forms of mediation, consultation, all kinds of interactions to be able to help to strengthen those persons and the counseling that is necessary. And we don't look towards it as a culture. We don't seem to understand that we must pay attention to matters of that nature and to stymie that whole approach of violence and sometimes loss of life. So I want to commend the ministry for the excellent work. Those two officers were doing very well. I want to say that the synergies have worked with the court system, but it is extremely important that we get that partnership for peace going again, and the kind of record keeping that is necessary, and that we engage women who are aggressive and are hitting at the men and fighting and doing whatever that is wrong, so that when they have to go to the court system, they go through that program that helps to strengthen them, their personality, their knowledge, and the kind of temperament that they have, that they're able to treat to it in a different manner. And as I said, sir, we will take to the public domain in relation to some of the aspects of what has been discussed here today, because I know in the interest of time, it would not be easy for me to be able to delve into a number of the areas that I have listed that will help to make the difference. And so I want to finally highly commend the government for establishing an elder care department in the way it has. It has been long overdue. The Honourable Member for Christ St. Michael East will tell you, since 2003, I had a project for a daycare center in St. Thomas for the elderly. Daycare center for the elderly. The property is now falling apart, but it does not mean that we must not be putting them or positioning them across the country where we can get help. And rightly so, the Honourable Minister said earlier about the connections with the faith-based groups. So you're talking about St. Barnabas Church. I know of other governmental institutions and faith-based as well as private institutions that are doing daycare and doing exceptionally good work, particularly the National Assistance Board. They're occupying church halls and so on to be able to bring this aged together, that they can recreate, that they can use the skills and their innate abilities to be able to make a difference. And so we will continue to engage. I thank the Honourable Minister for the privilege to be working with Dr. Wiltshire and others. And once we get out there with the community linkages and the intergenerational linkages as well, where we have so many retired persons, males and females, and we have changed the whole culture of our society, where we know of the extended family and the excellent work that extended families played in making sure that the father, the mother, well, sometimes not the father, but mostly the mother, uncle, auntie, everybody had been a role model and stabilized families. We've now gone to the nuclear families, where little girls and boys at primary are walking with a key around their necks. They let themselves in the house. There's no engagement in the community. There are no mentors in the way that there were before, and therefore we are losing a lot of those intergenerational linkages which are associated with our programs that we are designing to be able to get the blessings of the Honourable Minister and the Cabinet of Barbados, that we can go out into the communities. We're ready for the Granddaddy Project to start up. It has got the blessings of the Ministry of Education. We want to do one in each of the zones. We also started the community elder care conversations, where family members are an integral part of it. And the two we have had so far, on the 16th of February, those came off well. People came out in their large numbers, and they were saying for how long we were waiting for this, more than probably 25 years. And so we are on the right trajectory at this time. But as I indicated, in the interest of allowing my other colleagues to get a chance, I know that our time will come when we do the interactions with the various community groups and engage. Up to tonight, the Honourable Minister, well, the Permanent Secretary has sent some kind of communication where there is a group that wants to discuss this matter. And so we are going to be engaging as many organizations and institutions, private, public, as well as faith-based and so on, to be able to help us with this, because this is a matter that is impacting on the lives of every single household in Barbados. And I close, sir. I receive more than 100 calls a week from persons who say, my mother is being robbed, we are being beaten. There's a set of people who come around and cash checks for us, and they charge $30 a check for the old people in their homes, which is downright ridiculous, criminal. For every time that a senior citizen can't walk, can't move out, has no family, that anybody should come to the house, give them resources, and take $30 per check, and go into the bank, some of them, with 30 checks in their hand and they're being processed. It is criminal, and therefore the legislation that we have worked towards, and it will soon be going forward to the organization that will help us with the framing of it, will tackle all of those areas, because I cannot wait, Mr. Chairman, sir, to see a good few Barbadians get put in prison when that legislation comes, because our senior citizens are our nation builders, and they worked and toiled in the plantation fields and in white people's houses and stores in town. And then all of a sudden, because they're coming down with early dementia or Alzheimer's, they are being treated like the boys and girls in the yard. Unless we link our young people, go to the district hospital, do the visits, let them see what is happening, work with them in the households and in the villages, and get the mentors to work with them so the knowledge and the skills can be passed on. We would just be spinning top in mud, spending millions of dollars, and then there will be no result in the way that we expect it. We are in the departure zone. My honourable comrade and member here for St. Michael East, whether he likes it or not, we are in the departure lounge. We don't know what will happen to us in another few weeks' time if anything triggers our memory or our health. And therefore, I think it is incumbent upon us to be able to do what has to be done to make sure that the centenarians in Barbados and the aged get and enjoy the services that are required to be able to help them to live longer and healthier lives as a result of what we, the younger generation, do to help to stabilize them and their lives and the longevity that they require, living in peace and harmony wherever they are across this country. And those are the general comments I will wish to make, Mr. Chairman, sir, in the interest of time and giving way to my colleagues who would have a lot of questions. And if I have to be able to answer to them in 2 minutes anytime, I have absolutely no problem, because these civil servants here, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, as I close, worked in the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs from March the 17th, 2020, every day leading up to 2022, except Easter Sunday, particularly in 2020. And I think that the insults and the criticisms, because we're not spreading our word to let people know the quality work that has been done there and continues to be done, that when they look at all of them, sir, excellent work, one of the best functioning institutions in this country. And I will take kudos after them, with your permission, to them, sir, with your permission, because I was there. The Honourable Minister for St. Michael East is there. St. Michael South is there. He too understands, and he is there with them. And I know that we will be able to give some results. It's not only about money, but it is about service, quality, tithing of time, voluntary service, as well as other people coming on board to help to build Barbados, pass on the mores and the values to our new generation. So when their times come, the new generation will be able to carry on that legacy. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, sir.
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Honourable Member, for your comments. And of course, I endorse every single word that was just said. It really is an honor to come after the Honourable Member for St. Thomas and to be able to deliver on some of this important work. I think the question that was asked, I would ask PS, probably to shed some light in relation to Partnership for Peace, and then Mr. William Warner.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to give some brief information, and that is that in relation to Partnership for Peace, and I'll ask Mr. Warner to provide the details of this program, we have made provision for an expanded Partnership for Peace program in the next financial year. We also will be partnering with UN Women to ensure the successful execution of this program. So I will now ask Mr. Warner to just provide a few details in relation to the Partnership for Peace program. Mr. Warner?
Thank you, Permanent Secretary. Good afternoon. In terms of the Partnership for Peace program, it began in 2012, and so far we have done 13 cohorts of the program, and approximately 112 meals have passed through that program.
I hate to interrupt. Just give your...
Sorry, William Warner, Program Officer, Bureau of Gender Affairs. 112 males have gone through the program. And I want to assure the honourable member for for St. Thomas that Partnership for Peace program is alive and well. It has been relocated in the Bureau of Gender Affairs. I actually had some discussions with one of those persons who has been actively involved in the program from its inception. And we have gone through a number of areas where we think the program can be strengthened. One of the areas that we have to do a lot of work in is the outreach to the judges and to probably the Bar Association. I share the concern of the honourable member for St. Thomas about the women. Any person who commits act of domestic abuse, I believe, should be held accountable. At this stage, I would be very cautious, though, in terms of having women involved in the program, because, as we may very well appreciate, sometimes men need a space where they can feel comfortable. So at this moment, I would be a little hesitant about bringing women into the program. But I think after we do our evaluation, then maybe be able to have a look maybe at how we can improve the program and also incorporate women in some aspect of it. Thank you.
Honourable member, if you could just share what essentially the program is, though, what benefits we could anticipate from a Partnership for Peace, why the honourable member for St. Thomas would think it is so important, and why the PS has spoken to the fact that we've put more monies to it. What are some of the anticipated results of the program, and in your experience, the benefits to Barbados? Honourable member, I met Mr. Warner.
Okay, from our monitoring, for our evaluation report that was done on the program, a lot of the men expressed the fact that the program had benefited them, and that they felt that they were in a better position to handle the anger. Also, they were able to share some of the program with their colleagues. And generally, some of them, they commended the program generally. That was a good program, and one that they would recommend to the other male counterparts.
Thank you. Honourable member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just have a single question. The minister, as he spoke in introducing the head and the session in the well of the Parliament, spoke to his vision of a ministry which is not simply responding to challenges that arise, so taking all the telephone calls and the online applications that we've heard of today, but actually being proactive in raising the standard of existence. He spoke to realizing human dignity. And my question has to do with what can the minister or any of his team share with us with respect to realizing that vision? The vision where the ministry becomes proactive, being intentional about establishing the dignity and worth of all human beings in the country, rather than being a ministry that is bombarded, or that is only bombarded by telephone calls and emails and those kinds of things.
Thank you, honourable member. I also want to thank you too for the working relationship that we have, obviously, because our ministries have to work together, particularly as it relates to the third sector, but also labor, but particularly with the third sector, to be able to deliver to people. And I also think to be able to get that same vision that you just expressed across, because there is no way that the government and this ministry is going to be able to deliver on its mandate if we remain so insular in our understanding and insular in our outpouring of support as well. And so I really feel one of the first things we have to do is continue to deepen our relationship so that we work through the third sector, work through the NGO sector, and of course continue the great working relationships that we have as ministers and MPs, you know, to be able to do this work. I was going to say in my closing comments about this idea of trust and ego. I think I'll say no, because there is a natural distrust between the state and its people oftentimes, right? It just happens. I remember once I posted before I was an MP on my social media, I used to make a lot of social comments, and people said, oh, you should become a politician. You have such good ideas. You care about the people. I became a politician. I said the same things. You're just saying that because you're a politician. You don't care about the people. And everything has changed, and I'm the same as that person, you know? It is the Honourable Deputy Prime Minister laughing because she knew long before when we were busy trying to be young social activists and rebels. And so there is this distrust that just exists between politicians, between the state and its people. But I feel that that gap has to be filled by the third sector, the NGO sector, that has a natural, almost a more legitimate relationship and people's understanding with themselves. And I feel that the state has to step back. Do not see it as an ego process, but step back and work through a lot of these NGOs to be able to deliver the work. And that is just the truth. We have to strengthen. I mean, anybody in this group would tell you that I keep talking about partnerships. Not because, and Mr. Rose, who's behind me, would tell you that we weren't just talking about giving money, but real meaningful partnership that allows us to deliver on our mission. We wrote a paper, Mr. Rose, Ms. Richards, actually, and myself, we wrote a paper years ago on can the state build social capital? And the question that we were asking was, given the fact that a lot of our natural, organic CBOs and community vibe had died, how can the state deliver on that mandate? How can we fill that gap? And we recognize that to do that, we had to do this work to build social capital through these NGOs. And so I think that's the first thing, Honourable Member. We step back, we swallow our ego. It is not about pride, it is not about us, but it's about building trust and being able to deliver and through institutions that people trust and so on. Of course, with the checks and balances to make sure that there's no skullduggery when it comes to government funds, because you still have to ensure that the funds are accounted for. I think we've also all subjected ourselves to the CFR process, the commitment for results, where we've listed our plans for the year, we've set timelines for the year. I think you have to be serious about monitoring and evaluating our plans and our targets and our goals and report to the public and report to ourselves. I've told PS at every meeting we have a Gantt chart almost, and we say every meeting where we were this and where we were that, and where, you know, to hold ourselves accountable to be able to account to the people. I think also there can be no continuation, and I've been in this ministry a long time. I mean, I joined this ministry in 2002. And so I consider myself a public servant in many ways. But this idea that any government agency or any ministry can be tone deaf, you know, it has to stop. Because if it is that you're delivering goods and services and people are not receiving you for one reason or the other, it is an opportunity in my mind to stop, reflect, re-examine, and having done that work, re-engage in a way that allows you to serve the people in a better way. So I just think now for us, we have the skills. This group here is so talented. Like, I know we have these skills. And so we just have now to remain humble and to look at our work and just put people first and deliver. I mean, in very common, simple words, Honourable Member.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to end, not with a follow-up question, but to recognize the point you made and maybe emphasize it some more. Because the issues are cross-cutting, the addressing of the issues must be collaborative, and I appreciate your speaking to not approaching these matters in a siloed way, engaging not just other government departments, but I know there is often, you spoke about the tension between government, the state, and the people, but there's also often tension between different arms of the same state, which must be, we have to put aside, and I've seen this firsthand in government, we have to put aside those things that cause us to feel that we are giving up turf or power or some kind of stupid stuff rather than focus on the issue. And I end by congratulating you, Minister, on your support for the Social Justice Committee, because that in itself is a collaboration between your ministry and the ministry that I have the honor and responsibility of leading, and to reaffirm and restate my commitment, because I know of yours, to making sure that we can allow Barbadians to live in dignity with the appropriate access to all the services that lend to good well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess all good things come to those who wait, and I have waited patiently. Let me first of all say thank you to the Minister in his overview of where this ministry is not only at, but also intending to go. I also have appreciated listening to the members of the team. I had the honor under the former minister to work very closely with the team at this ministry when we were working on the care packages. And while I, like some of my colleagues prior to that, perhaps had a different view of the staff at the ministry, I certainly came to recognize, as the member for St. Thomas indicated, that there are a number of very hardworking, caring persons within this ministry who have done a lot with little, and perhaps sometimes have been misunderstood in terms of their approach to dealing with a number of the social matters that come before them. That is not to say that we don't have some work to be done in relation to those who may not interact and interface with people who have genuine issues and need to be things that need to be addressed in an emergency. But I am pleased to hear from the minister that dealing with the attitudes of officers is obviously a big part and thrust of these estimates, and that training has obviously started, because I, like the minister, agree that the people who have to interface when they're, particularly when they are in a crisis, but the persons they have to interface with have to also be persons who care. And therefore, I am pleased to hear that that transition is obviously taking place. I'm also happy to hear about the partnerships that the ministry intends to embark on. I just would want the minister perhaps to speak a little bit about how does he intend to break some of the processes that lead to us being able to execute quickly, to enter into those partnerships. Because while we take all this time on process, oftentimes we find ourselves in a situation where the most vulnerable are waiting on very important resources. And therefore, I think we have to really think seriously about the weight in terms of being able to get that aggressive focus of partnerships of the ministry together. I'm also mindful that with the amalgamation, there is going to be much hope in terms of how social services are delivered. And I'm excited by the fact that there's going to be a decentralization of a number of the resources into the communities. But I think, Minister, you mentioned in your opening that obviously there were conversations that now had to be had with the unions. I don't think you mentioned any timelines in terms of how long that is going to take. But my main question to start off with is really, not to pin you down to timelines, but simply to ask you to comment a bit as to what can people expect in the interim. Because while those discussions are ongoing, there are probably going to be conversations regarding transitions in terms of workers' status. What is that going to look like for the vulnerable person who is trying to access services? Are we going to have a longer wait? Are we going to start the phased approach of the decentralization of services into communities with those who are willing? What is it going to look like? It sounds good, but what is it going to look like over the course of the next few months?
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. And I mean, you're right. I think the truth is that the idea of partnership is very important to the ministry. I have said it several times. The direction that we're going, we've tried to make clear. But at the end of the day, I think I said in my opening, we got to shoot for the stars and still stay among the stones, get the galaxy and the ground right. Big things and small things. And your question is, because while the grass is growing, the horse oftentimes is still starving. So what are we going to do with that? So, the truth is sometimes these things take a little longer than one would like. Bureaucracy has its benefits, but bureaucracy also has its burdens, and sometimes people are loyal to processes that were shaped and given to us in times long past. Colonial era where you had to go through all these checks and balances and steps, People do things sometimes by rote because that's the way it's always been done. And I think some of our work is going to be to break that down and to be a little bit more, I think, not only curious about why we do things. The Prime Minister has asked all of us, deconstruct or reconstruct. What are these processes? Why are you doing this? Is this necessary? Will technology make it better? The questions that we ask ourselves in all of our ministries, and we ask ourselves in the ministry. For example, if I were to look at what we've been doing in welfare, we haven't waited for the amalgamation. We can't. I think the chief has been pretty excellent in being able to respond a lot quicker. In many cases, I also think there has to be a point where, you have to give your officers latitude to do things. And freedom to do things will come with error, but you have to give people room to make errors so that you could bounce forward, not bounce back, but bounce forward at the end of the day. I'm thankful for the PS who sits beside me because he also has a very flexible kind of understanding of work. And I think that's going to be very important. I think flexibility is the word because with the burden that is on welfare now, the 400 cases to one officer, that is pretty much like, we ran out of money in terms of the original allocation, I think, earlier this year, late last year. December, we were pretty much out of funds, which meant that we did all that we could do with the money that we had. We got some additional funds. I understand the ministry has given us some additional funds now, and to be able to do things for people. But we have to be able to move faster. I've asked the officers to give people a break. If you make a mistake, give people a break. When people come into the ministry, whether they're dressed well or not dressed well, whether they have an appointment or if they don't have an appointment, people come to see me. Originally, my Saturday used to be, I know this person didn't have an appointment. And now it's like, appointment, if I'm there and somebody outside, let them come in. And I just think that has to be the way we do business, which is to prioritize people. This idea that you have to be so loyal to function and to formality and that is a burden that we're carrying. So we've put away a lot of that in the ministry. I think I run meetings, at least I try to. I run meetings almost like we're all even and we're just trying to get ideas. The only time, Honourable Member, I think that they would probably tell you that they see me get upset is when it is that somebody has disrespected somebody else, particularly a client. But generally, we run meetings like, almost like how a round table is supposed to work. But I think it's about putting aside those functions and being experimental. I know that you care very much about the way we've been doing welfare, the housing, for example, and how long that takes. That people can't get their rent paid and they won't rent to us, and the idea of going to the agents as well, like just trying new things. So go to the agents, let them do the work on behalf of us, as long as we don't step on the crease in terms of the financial rules. So flexibility, reminding people every day, why is it? I asked PS the other morning, why do you come to work? I asked them, why do you come to work? Why are we here? If you keep that at the center, then I think we could do better. But again, recognizing that bureaucracy helps, recognizing that bureaucracy hurts.
Thank you, Minister. And I will just add to that leadership matters as well. And the ministry has benefited since 2018 from the level of leadership that cares. And I think that we are on the right track in terms of helping the staff to make that transition, that we're really here to provide a service, whether it's roads, whether it's water, whether it is welfare. At the end of the day, we cannot hold on to the systems that we have held dear because the systems are no longer working for the people and the demands are becoming greater as well. I want to go a little parochial though. I often don't do this, but since you have come from out of the bosom of my constituency, I think it would be only appropriate for you to shed some light for the residents in St. Michael's Southeast as to some of the plans for the Joris Dunner home and also for the Golden Rock Day Nursery. And I ask that because I think in respect, I know there are a number of persons from Vauxhall and I believe Lancaster that are currently being housed at that particular location at Joris Dunner. It also was a facility that would have housed a number of persons during Hurricane Elsa. And I am just curious, I don't see specific mention in the summary of the estimates for renovations to the existing structure. I know that there are some upgrades that are needed, and I would just want to know what is specifically happening there. Also, on my visits to the facility, one of the things, and I know I would have raised it with you, but I'll also raise it here, that struck me was the fact that there was no art in many of the rooms on the walls. The walls were pretty clear of any kind of images. I'm not sure if that is a deliberate intention of the ministry. But I think that places like that we're housing the elderly or we're having as these types of facilities need to look like home, a home away from home. I think that we have to look at that facility perhaps going forward, especially in that community where it is so densely populated, as being able to facilitate daycare for a number of elderly persons within the community. You have an excellent program in the form of the elderly care program, which has been certainly meeting the needs of a number of the elderly. But I think once the persons are relocated from Lancaster back to Lancaster and Vauxhall, certainly there needs to be some clarity to the community as to whether they will be able to again utilize that particular space. As it relates to the Golden Rock Day Nursery, there are some renovations that are needed. I know there's also the issue of space. That is the go-to day nursery. I am almost certain that you may have attended that day nursery as well, Minister. And I would want to think that some attention would be paid to this space. There are some vehicles that are across the road from that nursery that I do feel that the ministry needs to pay some attention to, that are creating a nuisance for the residents. And while it should really rest with the environment, I think it has to be a concern deeper for your ministry because you have young babies and small children in that facility as well as staff. So I would want you to just address, are there provisions in these estimates to take into account the renovations that are required for those two facilities?
All right, thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister. And as yes, I do come from the bosom and I care very much about these issues. So I will ask the Director of the National Assistance Board to speak on the Georgetown, and then I will ask the Director of Child Care Board to speak on the Dolores Marwell.
Thank you, Minister. So in relation to the Georgetown Elderly Daycare Center, yes, we are aware that that facility does need some upgrade. We are concentrating on the completion of the Vauxhall Village first, and then at Lancaster House. There is a philanthropic entity which has expressed an interest in doing some work with this facility. There was some stalling because they could not find the plans and so on. So they are working on that. We would have had an obstacle. We would have thought by now we would have gotten the facility back and running as a daycare center after being closed during COVID, but as was mentioned before, we had to relocate the older persons from Vauxhall. So as soon as that, most of those persons from who would have been housing during ELSA, we only have one person there now, and once his house is complete, which should be within a couple of months, he will be relocated as well, and the facility will be reused for the purpose it was really intended for in the initial phase. You would have mentioned about when you go to the facility, you're not seeing, you don't sense in terms of the ambience, and we would have realized that too, and there are some plans once we have upgrade to have a mural and have some art and so on in the place to improve the environment. If we're going to be speaking really of age-friendly environments, it's not only about the physical structure, but the whole atmosphere as well, and making people feel comfortable. So that is the thrust really, to really have our environments where a place that older people will want to be and staff will want to work. So that is in trend.
Ms. Richards on the day nursery.
Good afternoon. Roseanne Richards, Director of the Child Care Board. Honourable Minister, I think that I should first start by saying that this year we have put in about $200,000 into the estimates to look at renovations to some of our day nurseries. It is a small amount. I don't want to promise you that my word would be one of them, but we would put them on the 1, 500? Oh, it increased to 500.
Yeah, we put in place 500,000, and
Yes.
I've tried to, I wouldn't say cajole. I've tried
300 is for my world?
I was thinking my world and Joan Arndal to be a land and pine, but you know, they're in the estimates.
But the monies are there to start. It is a small amount. We would like to at least do a lot to the day nurseries, but it's a start. So I don't want to promise you, but we would have you in mind. In relation to, you said about the numbers, the capacity, I think that's one of the smaller ones, and I know that we have a long waiting list. I think we may have to look at, as a department, a ministry, and possibly a government, building more day nurseries because there is request, and I think that the fact that the fees are so small, it is great attraction for persons to want to get their children, not only the fees, but what we offer. The package is very good, so that is something that we would have to look at going forward, building additional daycare facilities.
I think the minister has heard you loud and clear, and I'm sure the next estimates will hopefully reflect additional facilities within that community. I just wanted to go back to the comment that was made earlier in relation to the George Dunner home, because just as a follow-up point, I would want to encourage perhaps activities being done in the facility once we have, because you have so many elderly people there. Again, on my visit, everybody was in their rooms, and I think that there's just one communal space, well, two communal spaces, but there needs to be activity, because if there's not activity, elderly people will just revert into their own bubble. And while that is good to some extent during COVID, I think as we come out, we need to find safe activities for people to engage in as well. So I would hope that that type of activity can return in terms of healthy lifestyles, conversations about health and healthcare and stuff like that within the actual home. My last question relates to the People's Assemblies. I note that you have a budget again this year for the People's Assemblies. Obviously, this administration would have brought an end to what we considered to be not the best approach in relation to getting participation of the public in governance in this country. There was obviously a process that was taking place previously where it did not necessarily allow for persons to be elected. We're of the view that that obviously led in many cases to the allegations of political partisanship. The resources that were allocated often did not meet the needs of the community, and we basically took a position that we would bring that to an end. I know we've done a lot of work by appointing the Thorne Commission to be able to look into another form of local government, and I'd be interested to hear, with these funds, where are we at this point in relation to making that transformation so people can have and participate in a greater way in their own affairs within the country.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. I will ask Mr. Mark Franklin to address the question, please. Deputy Permanent Secretary.
Good afternoon, honourable members. Mark Franklin, Deputy Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of People Empowerment. Yes, thank you for the question. Basically, we have done some activities, but there's still room for improvement, and we are working steadfast to try to complete some activities and so on where that is concerned. The original members of the Thorne Commission, they've been instrumental in assisting the ministry in looking and charting a path towards advancing the whole issue of the People's Assemblies. Basically, in terms of some major activities, we thought in terms of marketing and introducing it to the members of the public, we would need to look at things like developing a logo, a slogan. We needed to brand the People's Assembly. So we've had some meetings with the members of the Thorne Commission, led by, I believe it was Mr. Thorne, Mr. Ralph Thorne. We formulated a public relations plan to inform the public about the rationale for the People's Assemblies, the benefits and so on that would accrue from the People's Assemblies. We've done things like how to be creative, formulation of like skits and so on and so forth, so that we could sell and just to sensitize the public as to what we need to do to introduce the People's Assemblies.
Madam, Deputy Prime Minister, I'm sure you want to know in relation to how far we got in terms of its structure and so on. So perhaps a little bit more information in relation to, because we've had several meetings and the People's Assemblies are now at a point where we want to bring PR on them, but the Thorn Commission has done their final report. We have an idea of the structure. We're hoping at some point that the Parliament of Barbados would take lead on the People's Assemblies because it's supposed to be a constitutional part of our constitutional obligations. But we've done significant work in that regard. So perhaps a little bit more background as to where we are and share that with the public.
Yes, thank you very much. So we definitely want to see the need where we go to town halls. That will be the next definitive step in terms of advancing the matter. So we're going to have some town halls. We were in the midst late last year of planning these town halls and so on in terms of choosing where they will be located. And then the next thing we're going to do, we're going to look at doing some pilots, which in terms of identifying where should we have some pilots so we could get some best practices. We could see and analyze and assess what are some of the weaknesses, what are some of the strengths and so on, so that before we do a total rollout, we can have these, we could use the lessons learned and experiences to basically inform what we think in terms of where we would go in terms of rolling out the entire People's Assemblies.
I can add to what the Deputy Permanent Secretary is saying. Essentially, Honourable Member, the plan going forward for the People's Assemblies, and you know, there are obviously benefits to having a form of local government. Indeed, only a few weeks ago I was discussing this matter with someone and they told me that probably one of the I don't want to say error, but one of the deficiencies in our form of governance, as you alluded to, was the fact that we do not have some form of local government, because the People's Assemblies are essentially intended to ensure that community concerns are drawn to the attention of the relevant authorities. And those persons who will be sitting in the People's Assemblies obviously are closer to the ground, or will be in a better position to articulate the concerns of the various communities. So we have provided a substantial amount of money in the 23-24 estimates for the People's Assemblies. The plan going forward is to have a comprehensive public education program which we wish to roll out early in the new financial year to get the feedback from the public in relation to the report that was submitted by the Thorn Commission. We are also going to investigate and look at the sites for the establishment of the assemblies. We are going to are in the process of formulating an action plan for the rollout of a pilot project, because obviously it will take a significant amount of resources to put in place all of the assemblies. So we want to actually implement a pilot project with 2 or 3 individual assemblies, both in terms of the municipal area as well as in the rural areas as well. And as I said, we are going to look to operationalize that comprehensive public relations program so that the public can make an input in relation to the program going forward. So that essentially is what we plan to do in the next financial year. Honourable Member.
Yeah, very quickly, Honourable Member, in the report, there were 21 People's Assemblies that we were looking to roll out, each having a minimum of 30 members, of which 25 will be community residents, two will be representatives of persons with disabilities, 2 from youth or students organizations, and we said 1 student who was a male or a woman drawn from the Barbados Community College or a school, just to have youth representation. The People's Assembly summary, we put that out at different points. It was online. We put it at certain post offices. We held several consultations. And the role, I won't go through all of them, but the roles and the functions of the People's Assemblies were given. We wanted it to provide a social safety net for members of the community. and to hold government departments accountable. I think the primary difference that people would want to hear, because I had I would say pleasure, some might say otherwise, but I led the constituency empowerment department and was engaged in the construction of constituency councils, and so I generally don't tend to say anything negative too much. But I think the primary difference, and perhaps where the weakness was in the constituency council, was that those members were picked pretty much by the MP for the area. And in this case, these persons would be elected so that the residents would have a choice in who they want to serve on the People's Assemblies to serve them. So that it wouldn't be a case where you handpick your friends or whatever. People choose who they want to be able to support them. And then we've asked for the People's Assembly, the reps of the assemblies, to also be recognized on boards, to be given that authority, and to make serious input into government's programs and policies, which is also a deficit, I think, in the structure of the constituency council. So this offers a much more holistic, more democratic approach to strengthening governance, I think, than the former version. And this year we're going to be spending more time engaging in PR so people know the things that I just said. And then we will start with a pilot, but so far that is where we are.
Thank you, Minister. I just want to close by just saying, I see the chairman pulling his mic, but just to say that I think it is critical in the public education to make that distinction and also to reinforce through perhaps the pilots exactly how we will execute, because I think there's no point in having another entity or structure being established where people express concerns, but then they don't feel as though those concerns are then actioned by the relevant ministries. We have done an excellent job, I think, in being able to create various platforms for people to be able to raise their concerns through the rubbing shoulders, these parish speaks, and I think the People's Assemblies, once that is able to be given life, I think that will give another opportunity through a very democratic process to be able to allow people to participate in democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to Honourable Member. Just to say, the monies that are allocated this year are really just for PR, education, to get people to understand what it is that we're doing and the functioning. So we want to spend a whole year educating so that we don't thrust it on the people. And then the following year would be about implementation.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for St. Michael Southeast and Honourable Minister. We are in the toenails of time with respect to discussion on this head. I'm gonna ask the Honourable Member for St. Michael West and the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central to quickly pose their questions. See if we can get that done. We are concluding at 1:30. We are concluding this head. So, and the minister, the Honourable Minister, has to wrap up as well. So perhaps you can pose your questions and the minister will so conduct business at his end in terms of allowing members of the team to answer and then proceeding with his wrap-up. Honourable Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you, Chair. I want to begin by echoing the sentiments of my colleagues, all my colleagues that spoke today, and commend the Honourable Minister and his team on what I consider to be a job well done, exhibiting an obvious understanding for the issues that face our citizens, exhibiting passion, drive, and Honourable Minister, your leadership is well noted. Now, the benefit about being on the tail order of the baton is that most of my questions were already answered. So I would just want to focus on poverty and the delivery of welfare services for our citizens. So I want to note that according to the World Bank, post-COVID, 88 million people globally have been thrust into extreme poverty post-COVID. And obviously, Barbados does not exist in a vacuum. So what you're facing is in terms of the overwhelming amount of requests for welfare services obviously is in keeping with this global trend. But in addition to COVID, it was a double whammy because after that we had the Russia-Ukraine war, which obviously for the globe and for Barbados increased inflation, superheated inflation. So you had COVID and that hurt a lot of people with businesses. And then we had superheated inflation, which made it hard for them to get off of their feet. All you gotta do is on a morning, take a drive down Lower Green, and you see the amount of people who, I don't think she'd mind me mentioning her name, Miss Bellamy, lining up to get food on the morning. And then out here in the Parliament buildings, just outside the Parliament buildings in the evening, the amount of people that line up there. So I want to note that the Honourable Member from St. Michael North had started this line of questioning, specifically dealing with speeding up the process of welfare applications. But what I want to focus on, my first question is, what is the criteria by which you assess the potential benefits for welfare? Obviously, with all of the overwhelming requests into the system, as the Prime Minister always likes to say, you have to address the most needy first. So can you take me through that, the criteria that you would use to evaluate?
I think the Chief Welfare Officer is best positioned to do that, but I just want to say that we've obviously lent tremendous support to a number of those agencies that provide support to other people. I hope to have a conversation with Ms. Bellamy during the course of the year, but for example, we've increased our subvention to the Salvation Army, and they also do a major feeding program. We've increased that. In fact, we've increased our subventions to almost everybody who does that kind of work. So in terms of being able to partner with people to give tangible benefits to people, then we've done a lot of that work as well. But I would let the Chief Welfare Officer speak to that process.
Sorry. Thank you, Minister, for your question. Well, there are different dimensions of poverty. So we have to do a very holistic assessment of the client. For sure, we're going to do an assessment of their income versus their expenditure. We're going to look at how many other persons are in the house, if they're working, if they can contribute, if their level of education is one that would allow them to earn a decent wage, whether they're healthy. So there are different factors that we would consider that would go into an assessment. Yes, everything that happens globally comes home to us. And we are, like I said, with COVID, we really weren't prepared. But since then, we've had to put a number of things in place. And not that we hope to see it, worsen, but I think we will be in a better position going forward to respond quicker to the needs of our clientele. But I wanted to say, we talk a lot about partnerships, and I wanted to say thank you to you as well, because I remember that there was a fire in your area, and you didn't wait really for the welfare department. You jumped right in and you were able to help your constituent locate the alternate housing, and then by the time we came in, you had done a lot of the groundwork, and that's the kind of partnership that we need. And sorry, my time is up.
Continue, focus.
Sorry.
I'm afraid it is not quite up, but you have to wrap it up. We have limited time, and I want to ensure, because every minute you speak or every second you speak over the minister then has less time.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just saying thank you, and I would like to encourage more partnerships like that. Thank you.
One more thing. So thank you. I appreciate that chance to be able to work with welfare. But just one suggestion. I was reading an article online.
Honourable Member, if you have another question, please ask the question.
Okay,
and,
we'll do so.
I want to give the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central
Right.
the opportunity to raise his question,
Right.
and the Minister still has to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, so the question is, have you looked into the use of AI? Specifically, an article I read on the University of Exeter in the UK, they use AI to mine databases specifically in mind of identifying poverty, people who were more likely to want to access poverty in the long term.
I mean, I don't know that we've used artificial intelligence for much in Barbados, to be honest, but I do know technology is a big part of what we're doing, and I would love to see the report on how they do it, Honourable Member.
Honourable members, Mike for Christchurch West Central, please ask your question immediately. Thank you.
I just want to, I will do that, but just let me commend the minister first. His zest, zeal, and on match sincerity. To me, as calling the mantra, people over politics, I can't let that go unnoticed. The moral test of any government is how it treats to its most vulnerable. And that is where I want to base my questions on. The most vulnerable, those in the dawn of their lives, the children, those in the twilight, the elderly, and it would be remiss of me not to speak about those. And thirdly, those with disabilities. My first question quickly, because we talk about child abuse.
Your question.
My first question, my question quickly, because I can tell you all the rest, so don't worry, is that we are talking about child abuse. We are talking about drug, whether it's drugs, sexual, physical. But one thing we'd like to know from your ministry is the prevalence of child labor abuse and work exploitation. That's the first thing. Second thing, the disabled community has asked me to be their voice today because we are moving to have a green economy by 2030, a fossil fuel economy, and as carbon neutral as possible. So we have what we call electric vehicles all across the country, which is a very good thing. But the persons who are living and affected with blindness, they are saying that because they're deal with hearing of these vehicles, buses and what's not, and in order for them to traverse safely, they want me to ask if there's any agitation on their behalf to have what they call sensor devices on these vehicles since they're no longer hearing them on the road. And so we can agitate to have these sensors so that they could be able to traverse in a safe way. Thirdly,
Honourable member, I'm afraid I cannot allow you, in the interest of time, further questions. The minister and his team still have to answer.
Okay, all right, I acquiesce.
The Director of the Child Care Board, quickly please, on the child labor question.
So to respond to the child, I'm Roseanne Richards, Director of the Child Care Board. To respond to the child labor question, we do not have readily available data because it is not reported often, but the instances when we get reports, we go and investigate. The last report I recall we received was sometime during the break after COVID, where a group of young persons were at a roundabout near Lears, and we investigated. However, there were further investigations, so it was not just a case of child labor, it was an issue of poverty within that house as well. This is why those children would have been there. But whenever we get reports, we investigate.
And the other question, I think, was in relation to the buses, but we had this when the Honourable Member for St. James North spoke, and in his report, which is a very comprehensive report that we met with over 50-something stakeholders, that came up, Honourable Member, and so I know in our conversations with Transport Board, it is something that they said they would seek to do because initially nobody thought of the silence of the buses being an issue, but it has become an issue for the disabled community, persons with disabilities.
Honourable member for Christchurch East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, this is just by way of a statement. I won't press you for an answer. Welfare and the social services need to evolve in accordance with what is going on. I have a concern that quite often on a weekend, when things happen after hours on a weekend, you actually cannot reach the welfare officers. So I'm just putting it out there that welfare is a 24/7 facility, to deal with emergencies, and it must evolve like the rest of the government service in recognizing that we are a 24/7 society. So I'm just putting that out there and asking, please, that be taken into consideration as a policy position going forward. Thank you.
Minister, I agree with you, and in fact, we discussed this yesterday, in which we said we have a 24-hour hotline. We brought on social workers now to be available to respond to people on a 24-hour basis. But I take the point because it has been a concern for all of us, really. Thank you.
Honourable Minister, proceed with your wrap-up. Honourable Minister.
Honourable Chair, I do not need 10 minutes to wrap up. I just want to take this opportunity to say thanks to, obviously, first and foremost, to my amazing team that is here and for the work that they've done in the ministry over the year. I really want to thank them for giving me the opportunity to lead them over the last 12 months or so. I also want to thank the honourable member who went before me, the honourable member for St. Thomas. I tell her all the time she left a beautiful pitch, well rolled, for us to be able to deliver at the pace at which we're delivering. So I want to thank the honourable member for St. Thomas and the former Minister of People Empowerment as well. In relation to a lot of the things that we've done, I just want to thank PAHO, for example, on the work that we're doing with the elderly, Dr. Devenish and his team, for the work that they've done for us in terms of the policy, the strategic action plan as well. In terms of the elderly, I want to thank BARP for the work that they do with us and all the agencies responsible for delivering to the elderly. And I also want to thank the young attorneys and that law firm, CBL, to be truthful, because I feel as if they brought so much attention to the elderly, and now we have turned what was a problem into a wonderful partnership. So I also want to thank them. I think that that was a moment that was well utilized. I do say a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. In relation to children, I must thank UNICEF for the work that they do with the ministry, particularly Heather Stewart. I want to also thank Jacqueline Seeley-Burke and her team, Sophia Moore, for helping us with the child protection legislation, both myself and Minister Abrams in his child justice bill. I want to thank Ms. Faith Marshall-Harris, who has become I like to call her my sparring partner, in relation to all things children as well. And of course, the staff at the Child Care Board and the staff at the National Assistance Board, and both so ably led, I think now, the chairman and the members of the board and the directors, Ms. Walcott at the National Assistance Board and Ms. Roseanne Richards at the Child Care Board, and the entire staff of the ministry, those two boards. I want to thank on disability, I want to thank Mr. Hinkson and his team, the entire advisory commission for the work that they've done. 50-something stakeholder meetings is a lot of meetings. And we've received a lot of reports and 1 million WhatsApp messages from Mr. Hinkson over the course of the last few months, but it's gotten us to a point where I feel we are about to do something transformative. I want to thank the Law Reform Commission for being able to stand by us to draft that, to help us have that legislation drafted, as well as the legislation that is being drafted now for the elderly in Barbados. In terms of the National Disabilities Unit, I obviously would have to thank in terms of persons with disabilities, I have to thank the National Disabilities Unit, but also the Council for the Disabled. I want to thank the entire team, the staff there, as well as the members of the council, who I think are true partners as well. The wider UN system for the support that they've given the ministry, Ms. Tony Brower, particularly at UN Women, but the whole UN Women system, Ms. Limia, I want to try to pronounce Limia's last name, but Limia, who is now the res rep and has done work, Didier Tribuque as well. We have a wonderful relationship with the entire UN system, and it would be remiss of me not to thank them. In terms of the staff, all of my staff, I want to say a very special thanks. I know that the talk of an amalgamation is nerve-wracking because people hear amalgamation and what they interpret is job losses. But we gave the assurance we weren't intending on dismissing anybody, though we may have to repurpose some jobs. I also want to thank the Prime Minister, who has been a very big support for the ministry and given us some additional resources to do the things that we've attempted to do. And her support and driving, really, of the amalgamation exercise. When I was offered this ministry, when the telephone call came and I was offered this ministry, it was with the proviso that I would be able to deliver on all of these things that we were hoping to be able to deliver. In fact, the words were, we spent the first few years focusing on the economy. it's up to you now to lead on the society. So we're driving these measures on the social side. And I think it would help us close the circle of enfranchisement that we keep talking about, you know, to put power back into the hands of people. So as I close, I want to just promise that we will continue to do the work in the ministry to put people first. We will continue to be humble ourselves and to be introspective and to just see where we've gone wrong and to do better as we go forward. And to just use the vibe and the pulse of the people as our conscience, I think, as we attempt to do the work that we are called upon to do. And then lastly, sir, I must confess that this team here and the respective staff in the various agencies, they are my priority. So I want to make sure that they have the resources to do the job. They have the space, because this is a lot of mental pressure, you know, dealing with persons who are under pressure themselves. And I also know that people who are hurting can't help people. It is hurting people who hurt people, and help people can't help people. And so we have to offer the level of support to the staff that they need. And PS and I have been talking about just making arrangements easier for the staff. And so with those few words, sir, again, I want to thank you and the entire chamber for the time. I want to thank all of my colleagues, so I feel as if I can call, honestly, all of them at any time to get the support that I have gotten over the last year. And with those few words, I ask that Head 35 stand part.
The question is that Head 35, Head 35 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honor the Speaker, and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the House be suspended until 2:45 p.m.
The question is that this Honorable Chamber be suspended until 2:45 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Honorable Chamber stands suspended until 2:45 p.m.